Hey everybody, we'll be getting started here shortly, just waiting on another guest. As you can see, I'm not at home, so this is going to be a little wonky to a little bit of a degree, but we're going to have the conversations, which is a Tiberius D of the Mask Off podcast, where we talk about just a bunch of different stuff, kind of a little more in depth, but like in a flowing kind of manner, and then followed right up with the newscast that you come here and love. So we'll be doing that shortly, just giving it a few more minutes for another guest to join us before getting it kicked off. So we'll see you soon.
Three, two, one. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the conversation. This is basically the podcast that I did before the Mask Off podcast, and it's largely what I get to do alone, although you'll see some Mask Off regulars here that have been kind of integrating into the show. Today is the Thursday show, and of course it means it's the Smart Ass Power Hour, basically all the nerds in one show. And so, yeah, of course, you either love this show or you hate this show, but the audience definitely does come to adore. First, we have CSP Cypher. You can find him on Crowdsource Politics, doing the news roundup, usually on Thursdays. He's taking a little bit of a break to help us out over here. Always appreciated, good sir. And you can also check out him on the Mask Off podcast. He's one of our liberal regulars that we very much like to beat up on whenever we're feeling bad. So it's good to have you. Thank you for being here. All right, next we have our good friend. He is a political operative for the Democratic Party, doing what most people on Twitch.com wish they could do, which is actual real life politics. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Sam Drizzy. Welcome back, sir.
Hey, good to be here. Really excited to be here. In fact, it's been a few weeks and I missed it. So, good to be back.
We have very much missed you. And speaking of missing people, you know him, you love him. Our series regular, Nate Dallin, is not here. We don't know where he is, but he's probably on dad patrol, so he'll probably roll here in 5 minutes. Like, sorry guys, I was busy doing this dad shit, because that's how he be. But we do appreciate him nonetheless, and we might actually have a surprise doghouse. We'll find out here later. But anyway, so what did you guys bring to the conversation today?
I have former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers to discuss, but I would want to save that for when Nate's around, if at all possible. So
we can make that work.
So I'll hold off on that for a little bit. But happy to talk about anything else in the meantime.
All right, Cypher, what are you bringing to the table this evening?
I'm sorry, no one could hear me on the stream that I'm streaming. So, and then I had somebody come to my door. So what I'm bringing though, they should be able to hear me now because I can see my little thing on the blurb down there, is that I want to talk about all the things related to either the difference between gross domestic product or gross domestic income and what we mean for recessions, like we've been talking about the last couple times, and possibly some student loan forgiveness or whatever else. So, but sorry, I had to step away. They were my brother's stepdaughter was asking if she could play music, so we're good.
All right, fair enough. I'm cool with this. This is a bit of a revisit on a discourse that was had a little while ago, but I didn't give my particular take on this outside of like talking to KOE, because this largely was like a right bash to left conversation.
That guy. I've never met him in real life. All I see is he posts these ridiculous memes that
He's
are
you.
all like,
But conservative,
yeah.
but not really.
He's just like, in my mind, and I'm calling him out a little bit here because I'd like to actually meet him on stream at some point. But he just seems to be like in the conservative media stream, whatever talking points they got, he's going to parrot them. So that's my impression of KOE so far.
Well, look, if
Love
we
to make
need
his
to,
acquaintance.
we can make this happen on the Mask Off podcast. Anyway,
Make it happen.
Yep. So anyway, outside of that, is that we can rehash this a little bit. I'm sure if Nate's listening in, he'll join us eventually with this topic. But so yeah, we can do GDP GMP real quick. I'm sure all the econ nerds will love it out there. So what exactly did you want to get into that, I guess that I would have to push back on, because that's pretty much the only thing we can do here.
Oh, I didn't hear what Sam wanted to talk about, so.
Yeah, you stepped away at that moment.
Yeah, sorry. I have a video of Treasury Secretary Larry Summers that I want to talk about.
Let's do
Former
it.
Treasury Secretary Larry. Well, I want to wait till Nate's around if at all
Okay.
possible. So we should take your topic first, if that's okay.
Okay. So yeah, with the GDI, gross domestic income numbers that came out, according to that metric, which is measuring the economic growth from a different angle, it's the amount of income people are receiving. I should say, and by people, I should say taxable entities. So that's anything that produces a tax, essentially. So we're talking businesses, people, corporations, nonprofits, whatever, right? Anything, all that stuff shows that we aren't actually in a recession, or if we are, it is the most mild of recessions that we've experienced in the last decade, probably since '92. Probably the most mild one since '92, because given what the numbers that we're seeing. But yeah, so that's just a thing that I think is important to point out, just in general.
Yeah, so I don't have to push back on any of that. It's largely I agree with it. Is that either we're in recession, which somewhat makes sense, but it's one of these like it's stagflation. It's not really a recession in regards like, yeah, we have negative GDP growth, but it's not like the economy is going into a deflationary spiral where you're going to see 5% of the economy get knocked offline. We're seeing like the economy is trying its damnedest to get back on its feet, and it just isn't able to. It's literally stumbling, if you will. And so that's the general kind of presence that I want to give to that. Like, I'm not worried too bad yet. And of course, the last time Nate was here, he was talking with, he was talking with Sam. Sorry, last time Sam was here, he was talking with Nate. And the long and short that were covering was over is that the worst of the inflation is probably over, which will probably pull us out of recession Q3. I don't know, because the numbers for me have been kind of anywhere and all over the place. Like, the fact that we actually got in a recession blew my mind a little bit, as far as numbers. And then when it got into, when it got into more concurrent numbers, is that even with the economic problems that we had seen, I was quite shocked that we were seeing the negative 2% growth in some estimations that they were putting forward. So, put what you will, it's either the economy is like hot, but it's contracting because it just can't maintain solvency, or the economy is cooled down to the degree where everything's working fine. It's just you're actually seeing what would be a quote unquote comfortable adjustment. End quote.
Yeah, if we're actually getting out of inflationary point, it would make sense that there would be some decrease in economic activity, given the extreme price that was gas for the last several months, chip shortages, used cars, and etc., and people spending down their savings. But at the same time, we had the revision happen. The first revision out of, usually there's three, I want to say. The first revision of Q2 GDP numbers, and that actually got revised up. So it was close to about a percentage point. I think it was 0.9% loss of GDP, and now it's a 0.6% loss of GDP. And to me, what that really says is that we're kind of in the recession of the finance industry, not a recession of the general economy at large. And I think you can see that with some of the groups of people that are saying that they're going to lay off people. Those are people that did massive expansions during the pandemic and just after the pandemic. So we're just saying like midway through 2020 to midway through 2021 ish. Facebook, any crypto group, any finance group, any data science group, like all the tech industries, tech bro industries, had a massive run up in hiring. They hired everybody because they were just trying to compete for talent, and there was so much demand for what they were doing, given everybody stopped buying experiences and started buying stuff. And that stuff needed to be analyzed to see if we could keep that stuff being sold and eke out as much profit from that stuff as we could, as well as like going and looking at least this is some of the things that I'm kind of doing is like looking at how the supply chain is going to react and readjust from this massive buildup to like downfall, and how it can do that. So you're gonna need like data scientists and analysts and people like that to measure all this stuff. But at the same time, if you have that massive run up of employment in these groups, you're going to overemploy people. And that sounds weird, right? But you're what a lot of these companies kind of do is that they go through and they'll hire as many people as they can and then cut the fat, right? Separate the wheat from the chaff and just fire people. And that's what they do. They go through these cycles where like we're gonna work your ass you're gonna work you into the ground, and then if you can't take it or you don't meet our expectations, you're gone. And that's what we're probably experiencing or going to experience here shortly.
Cutthroat bastards. I can't speak to that. I'm not an insider in that particular community. What it makes sense, the thing that I'm seeing here that I know of, I can't speak for finance. Finance is a really weird industry, and from the last that I heard, this is one of the prime places that we're seeing massive rollover when it comes to employment. It's not because people are getting in and getting out, but as much as people who have been doing the job for 30, 40 years are retiring because they're boomers, and they're being replaced by, millennials and Gen Z. So, and people like me that are trying to, work on up in the world. So I can't speak to that, but what I can tell you right now is that if there's any industry that I'm looking out on grounds that doesn't seem that stable, it's tech. Tech has been going crazy with trying to find the next innovation. They've been blowing a lot of money, a lot of time between COVID and supply chain redistributions and all this. One of two things I think is going to happen. Number one is either we're going to see somebody just lose. My bet, if that's the capability, if that's what happens, it's Apple, because Apple has not reworked its supply chain from China at all. And seeing Apple take a 30% hit because they no longer can get product to shelves at minimum, that's a real big deal. And I could totally see Alphabet's fortunes completely reverse in a couple of months. I'm watching that. Not going to say I'm guaranteed because I'm not an expert in that field, but I just want to lay that out there that I see that coming. The other side of that is that the entire industry at large has a doctrine that kind of doesn't make a lot of sense in regards that some of it's branching out. You've got people going to Cincinnati. You got people going to Austin. You got people branching out in the country, but the older systems that are like, oh, we have an entire work complex down in the middle of San Francisco that nobody leaves and is expensive as holy hell, and people literally work while drinking, or like literally like they work while having the dog around, this kind of thing, where they basically live at work. That is proving to be far less wanted because of COVID, even though COVID's kind of seen as no longer. I don't think that's going to last much longer, because from the numbers that I've heard, these companies blow a crap ton of money on having some really good talent, or at least on paper is really good talent. But remind me, when's the last major technological revolution that's come out of this industry has been? Like, we haven't seen an iPhone in a while. Like, I mean, the iPhone, as an example. Like, that's 2006. What's been the major rework? What's been the major renovation?
It's
I
all
can't think of one.
it's all been around the stuff you can't see. So machine learning has been the biggest one. Artificial intelligence is huge too, but that's not ready for market yet. Even though you have some instances of it coming with Tesla and some Siri like Apple products. Believe it or not, search engine optimization's changed a bit, but this is all stuff you can't see. That's all the innovation for the last 4 or 5 years has been customer centric and focused on getting the customers what they want. And it's all the things that people complain about, but it's also that convenience factor. Like, say you're on Facebook, right? And it knows what you want to buy before you do. That's part of the innovation with this artificial intelligence. Like it used to be just like demographic based. Now it's based on all that information that it gather about you and everybody else and pairing you with that product.
So I get
Yeah.
that, and the one that I will kind of like try not to shoot myself in the foot in is to at least to show that I like know somewhat what I'm talking about is cloud computing. This is Amazon's bread and butter right now. Cloud storage, cloud computing, to where they basically host a bunch of servers to either store or process data. That is where a lot of I think it's like 40% of Amazon's revenue is right now. Is just within that, and that wasn't even a tech company. That was literally a company that said, "I'm going to sell books," and just built out their own distribution system. That's kind of where the kicker is for me. It's not the companies that are within the norm that are really doing some of this really heavy lifting stuff. It's the companies that are a little out of the norm. So I'm a little sketchy when it comes to I'm a little sketchy when it comes to, I guess you would call it big data, if you want to call that industry what it is. So we'll see.
What about you, Sam? What's up?
So first of all, yeah, all the innovations that I see, I got an ad today. That like really struck me. I was on my computer and I had a pre-roll ad on YouTube, and it was like, pay for your purchases without ever taking your wallet out. And it's like, it just struck me that they were trying to sell me something that makes it easier for me to part with my money. Right? Like, all these innovations that they're selling as conveniences for the consumer is like things that enable impulse purchases, that enable people to spend money. And so I don't buy practically any of the innovation that's been coming out of any sector in the last 10 years that's actually been rolled out to consumers. We've got a lot of stuff in development that is highly promising, but none of it's actually ready for prime time yet. And in the meantime, we've got Uber and a bunch of like payment systems that are all about to be swept out of the way by Web3 and crypto because they can do it better. So like, what do we got? We got nothing. So I'm not a big believer in anything that's going on in tech right now, in like the mainstream tech industry. That's just me personally, and it can change very easily if things, once we have a little more pain in the economy, because that's that type of economic pain is what wipes out bad bets and malinvestment. So that leads me to my next point, which is that I'm not particularly interested in labels about whether or not that we're in a recession right now or not. I don't care. It feels bad out there to people, so that's what I'm mostly focused on. It seems to be getting better than it was a couple months ago, if polls are anything to be believed. However, two things. One, there are a lot of people out there, who have very successful media companies who benefit greatly, both in terms of politically for their agenda and also for they get more eyeballs, more views, and more clicks if they get the public to believe bad news about the economy. It's just bad news about everything in general, right? Bad news draws eyeballs. So, and that's why you see that, like conservatives during the Trump administration were like, how could the media treat him this way? No, man. They just want to make him look bad. They want to make everything look bad because when things look bad, they get more eyeballs. And it's the same thing right now. The mainstream press has been trashing the Biden administration for a year and a half. The right-wing press has been... The only difference between the right-wing press and the mainstream press is the right-wing press only goes after Democrats.
Yeah.
The mainstream press goes after everybody and makes everybody look bad. So, and so there's just a lot of people... And the worst out there, the worst out of anybody, if you guys do any kind of economic analysis YouTube, if you ever look for any economic analyst on YouTube, you'll see the whole cottage industry is built on making people terrified that everything's about to collapse. And that's how they make their money. And whether or not they actually believe what they're saying, just know that the point of the publishing is not to tell you the truth. The point is to make you feel frightened. And so you may be justified in being frightened. Maybe there's something bad's going to happen. And I actually do believe that things are going to get very bad. I don't think things are that bad right now. I think people who are low income are struggling because prices have gone up on things that are important for them, for their daily lives. People who with a little higher income, things have been pretty friggin' good, and so things are going great for them. But we're right now, as of this moment, in the last few weeks, the yield curve is inverting, and it has a 100% success rate in predicting recessions later on. And what's happening right now is we are headed into a period of choppiness, and we're going to have to see how that shakes out. And I don't know when it will become apparent to everybody that this is happening, but it is happening underneath the surface. And what you usually find is that the unemployment rate doesn't actually start to go up until the recession's underway and has been for a little while. So when when the actual real pain that I think is coming starts to make its presence felt in the public, I don't know, but I think it's going to happen, and we got to get ready for it. And we also have to accept the real truth about everything, which is that policymakers have very little control over this, and they shouldn't aspire to have control over this. I don't think the economic cycle. You can't control when the economy goes into recession. You can't. This is all just going to happen. And if you can try to prevent it, you can try to delay it, but this stuff is just going to happen, and you got to just give up control. Get ready for bad times if you think that they're going to happen, but don't wallow in fear, and don't fall prey to people who want to make you feel fear because they want you to be paralyzed and debilitated. But don't let that happen to you. You got to stride confidently no matter what the situation you're in, and do what you can to help yourself and those you care about.
Yeah, to me, it seems like this is something that maybe not be 100% preventable, but a lot of the pain can be averted, right? And
yes, that is true. The
so,
pain can be averted for people who are hardest hit.
Yes. So,
but you can't. But the one thing you can't do is the thing that everybody's been doing, Democrats and Republicans, for the last 20 years, which is to try to save companies from going bankrupt, which need to go bankrupt. Like General Electric should have gone bankrupt 20 years ago, and no one let it happen.
General Electric's finance department should have gone bankrupt 20 years ago.
But it should have been the company should have been broken into constituent parts,
and then it
spun
eventually
off
was, right? So I don't know. It shouldn't. I don't think it should have been necessarily bailed out. It should have been gone through the spin-off process, but that happened anyways. So
anyway, I'm not trying to be prescriptive about it. I'm not saying necessarily what they should or shouldn't have done. I'm saying doing these things actually prevents nothing. It just delays the actual result, which is going to happen all along. and will happen all the same. And that's how I view. That's my general view on policy, is that policy is there to help deal with specific constituencies' problems, and it's not a unifying force. It's to decide policy. The goal of policy is to decide winners and losers of the things that are already happening. And there's no way to, I think the biggest problem the Democrats have right now, to make this a little political, is that we're trying to make decisions that will benefit the whole country. And in reality, we have to just face up to the facts that, when you make policy decisions, there are winners and there are losers, and we have to be upfront about who the enemy is. We have to pick our enemies and say they deserve to lose, and here's why, and then make them losers with policy.
Yeah, I don't think when the next recession happens, whether how deep it is or how bad it is, it's anybody's guess. Depends on factors, right? It needs to all the help needs to focus bottom up, and I think that's what should have happened during 08. Now, I understand that we had a transition period in 08, so we had a new Democratic president coming in with Republican and conservative ideology at the tail, but HARP should never have been blocked. Like that should have gone to regular folk. Like if we had acknowledged that people were taking advantage of in their mortgage situation, and basically brought them into a situation where they could have stayed in their homes, have the people take a cut on the back end. So anybody that gave the loans out or bought them from somebody else had them take a cut of that rather than the collapse that happened. I think that would have made the Great Recession not essentially. Also, we got to stop contagion, man. Like if it wasn't for the derivative market, the housing market would have just been a housing market crash. It wouldn't have been this catastrophic fucking mess that we experienced, and with millions of people losing their jobs and losing their homes. Like it would have just been, oh, builders got fucked. Oh well, like it would have been just that. It wouldn't have had this cascading of impact.
It would have ended up with the worst thing that would have happened is there are a lot of people who are in the building industry who are low income, who would have gotten driven out of that industry and into other industries. They would be doing other work instead of building. Right now. For
sure. So I don't know. That's my whole thing about it. Like we need to not do that again. Just don't do that again. I don't care what else happens. I mean, I care what else happens, but ultimately, if you avoid doing that again, that's progress.
That would be great.
I do apologize. I am trying to figure out why my dog has to incessantly bark anytime after 8 o'clock. But also I am trying to figure out where our good friend Nate is. So please bear with me in that particular regard. I want to roll this conversation back a little bit, unless you guys want to have anything further on this. I'm quite curious, Sam, what you think about the Democrats doing a lot better in the polls. Because I'm a little testy on the polls. I mean, some of them haven't been the best in the world before, or at least in the last couple of years. But somebody asked me.
They've been getting worse. They used to be very reliable up until 2014, maybe. 2012 was solid as a rock at the national level. But they've been getting worse. Yeah. So you're asking my opinion on whether or not this is real?
Well, actually, I was just talking about hey, I'm not sure how great the polls are, because I mean, a lot of the polling agencies have been doing error rates of 4%, if not higher. That's pretty big margin, right?
Huge, huge margin. That's a mile wide. Margin.
So I've been a little skeptical when it comes to polls. However, people who ask me to do good faith arguments for the opposite side or be like, hey, what do you think is the actual possible effect of why the Democrats look like they may pull even on the Senate right now? That's some of the polls that people are throwing at me right now, and they're like, all right, steelman this. What's possibly happened? And I'm like, well, two things. Number one is that the economy is doing a little bit better, and if it's not hurting as much, people kind of change their mind. I think that's a little bit of that. But I think the big thing is that all of the Trump-looking candidates that have won are very much of the Ted Cruz type, in the regard that either they are beloved or they are hated, and they're not more
Nobody
middle of
likes
the
Ted
road.
Cruz.
Yeah.
Nobody likes Ted Cruz.
I
Even
don't
people
know.
who like Ted Cruz
Yeah.
don't like Ted Cruz.
No one likes
Okay,
Lion Ted.
but yes, I take your point.
Yeah, so the long and the short for me is that if you're talking about, I can't remember the folks in or the senator race in Pennsylvania, or you're talking about Herschel Walker in Georgia, the Democrats are sending some of their best candidates into this fray, or at least more moderate candidates that have a shot, versus the Republicans are sending some of their furthest right candidates they can get, or most inflammatory candidates, and at least by my estimation, that's probably why the polls are indicating the Democrats know that they have a fight on their hands, but they actually can hold. Is
It's
that
possible.
yeah, that's what I'm just saying. If you agree with that, Steelman, at all, because
otherwise
I don't know.
I do. I mean the even when things looked really really bad, the Senate felt a lot closer than the House did the whole time. And there are a couple reasons for that. One, and it's similar to what you just said, but I would phrase it a little bit differently. Candidates matter a lot more in the Senate. In the House, it doesn't really matter as much what type of candidate you are, because fewer people, your name ID is going to be a lot lower. Just because the nature of running a statewide race gets you a lot more name ID.
Right.
And you're going to get a lot more media attention, period, right? So, like, the candidate quality and what you do and what you say matters a lot more in the Senate, whereas in the House, like, look at Ron Johnson. He's the best example I can think of. Here's a Republican incumbent who's meticulously tried to build an image over the last 3 terms. He's been there a while now, and of like being fighting conservative, but also not being like offensive to anybody's values as an American, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he just like destroyed that in like an instant, like that, by trying to give fake electors to Mike Pence. Like, what was he doing? Either he just had no friggin' idea what he was doing and he's a moron and a stooge, or he's been masquerading as a serious person, and this whole time he's just been a Nazi, right? So, and so like that kind of thing. In a different election cycle, also, it wouldn't matter as much. But, like, this is now, like, in my mind, the way that elections work, it's less about the message, and it's more about where you can convince the battlefield you're fighting on. Right? So, like, in 2012, the Republicans wanted to talk about the economy. They wanted to talk about how bad the economy was. And the Democrats wanted to talk about literally anything else. And as long as the conversation wasn't about the economy, the Democrats were winning, right? It's sort of a similar situation now. And a couple months ago, it's not that anybody thinks the economy is doing great. It's that the prices have come down enough that people are possibly willing to entertain other issues in their psyche to think about. And I've been surprised at this. I mean, we had conversations early on where I was skeptical that this would make a huge difference for the Democrats, the Roe v. Wade stuff. But like, we now have decent evidence in multiple states, very different states, that it is a galvanizing issue for Democrats. And the problem that a candidate like Ron Johnson has, for example, is that the type of people who are galvanized by an abortion rights campaign to get out the vote are not the type of people who are like, whatever, fake electors. they're the type of people who are like, a lot of moderates out there who are more conservative on fiscal issues. These are the people who are being driven from the Republican Party, by the Trump people, right? And the reason why the Republican Party is really doing okay, even though they are driving these people out of the party, is because there aren't that many of them, right? There aren't that many moderates in the Republican Party. Like they're mostly the rich people in the Republican Party, and like there just aren't that many rich people in the country. Like most of the voters are low income, so like it doesn't usually make that huge a difference. But in an election like this, where people are galvanized to vote a certain way, and then you bring up an issue like this, like the stealing the election crap, that like plays right into that like culture war hands, then you have like things can shift. And I think the biggest is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back. The big unknown here is that, up to this point, we were thinking Republicans were pretty jazzed to come out and vote, and Democrats were not, right? But now it seems like Democrats are more jazzed, and the real open question is, how jazzed are Republicans?
I'm trying to figure out.
But because that special election,
Yeah, they got blown out.
they showed that they were not. I mean,
Yeah,
like it was not. There was not massive turnout. What it showed to me and a lot of other people who are watching all the elections that we've had, like the Republicans are turning out for their primaries, but they're not like. Are they going to turn out for the general election? And I do think that I think that my instinct is saying that the Republicans are going to turn out really big. And the reason why is because the Republican media machine is so much more powerful than the Democrats one. And they've barely begun to get people going on this. And they're going to. So, right, they've got a month and almost 2 months. No, a little over 2 months, in fact. A little over 2 months to, like, weave this, like, Donald Trump being raided by the FBI thing into a narrative that then weaves into another narrative that then gets people galvanized around some stupid bullshit culture war stuff that they then just push people to the polls. And I think that they've got it on lock. I mean, I think they just figured out how to get their side to do what they want.
I don't know.
So
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and so I think it's going to be less. The Democrats will be more evenly matched than they would have been because of this Roe v. Wade stuff. But I'm not sure how it's going to turn out on the Republican side.
Yeah, I don't know. So the thing that's going to make Republican voters not turn out are losses. And there's been a huge string of losses lately. Now the Republican voters get galvanized and to go to the polls over, like you said, culture war bullshit. But they're losing some of the narrative on that by not pushing it right now.
Could you just clarify which losses you're talking about, just so I understand?
So they pretty much the student loan forgiveness. Republicans didn't want that to happen at all. The Inflation Reduction Act. Republicans didn't want that to happen at all. They got blown the fuck out with Manchin pulling out of the Inflation Reduction Act, and then getting CHIPS Act Part 2 passed. And then they got the PACT Act, right? And the PACT Act made the Republicans look stupid as hell because they fought against it over being mad that they lost on the IRA. If I was a Democrat right now that just won a primary, I would just be putting that on blast 24/7 and be like, look, they don't actually
Democrats suddenly have a lot of ammo.
They don't care about you. They're trying to make it look like that they actually care about fairness. All this stuff that's going around with like the student loan forgiveness and how it's like a giveaway to the rich, just on blast. Hey, every single Republican that's talking about this got a PPP loan forgiven. They don't care about fairness. This is about them not liking the policy that actually helps you. And just keep pushing it. all the time.
Right, winners and
everywhere,
losers.
on
Winners and
every-
losers. Winners and losers, right? So they want the business owners to win.
Yep.
And they want you to lose.
Yep. Just keep
I
pushing
want to.
everywhere.
I want to give some credit to what you guys were talking about with the New York election. I missed this. Some people were talking about it in chat. I wanted to push this out real quick. So this was on the 23rd. Is that there was a special election for New York's 19th district. This is a more rural area sandwiched between Albany and New York City. So like right there in what they would call like mid-state or upstate New York.
There are a lot of Democrats up there too, so I don't want to. It's rural, but it's upstate New York, and there are a lot of small towns, and it's ancestrally Democratic. The Democratic machine is really strong there, so don't. It's not like rural Idaho.
I don't want to put that either. What I'm going to put it here is this: more rural area overall. So you would assume that the the Republicans have at least a bit of a lean here, and the Republican was forecasted to win, from what I can tell. Long story short, two big things: turnout. I'll put it this way. Popular vote for the Democrat, 65,000 votes. The popular vote for the Republican, 62,000. If anyone's wondering, the average voter block of a congressional district is somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000. So, turnout for this particular election, 27.12. This is horrifically tiny. And something tells me if the Republicans actually showed up, that would probably be a blowout. I could be wrong. But I think that's the assumption everybody made. Anyway, so yeah, number one, big deal. Number two, I don't know who any of these candidates are. So maybe one of them is a milquetoast Democrat that makes people, vote really well, versus the Republican be a jackass. I don't know.
So Ty, the reason why everybody was watching this and Democrats were so enthused by this is because of the low turnout, like you said, and the Democrats were more enthused than Republicans, but also because all of the Democratic candidates' ads in this race were all about abortion rights. And that's the reason why they're excited, because they think that the Democrats now think that this is more evidence that abortion rights is galvanizing their party. And the first piece of evidence that came was a ballot measure in Kansas that was on the same ballot as the primary election in Kansas. And it's like, Kansas is a pro-life state through and through. But the voters in the primary rejected a personhood amendment to their state constitution by, it was like 65%, something ridiculous. And that's the type of thing that makes people sit up and go, huh? Like, I was very surprised by that. I would have assumed that Kansas was just going to be like, great, no more abortions. Like, go for it.
Ironically enough, it's my home state of Indiana that's actually probably put some of the hardest hitting abortion legislation through and has, turned it into law. Like, I was actually a little shocked on that one. Don't get me wrong. Like, I understand there's a lot of people that don't like abortion here, but we're actually kind of...
It wasn't a ballot initiative, though, right? It was a legislature.
No.
Right. So
yeah, it was legislative.
Kansas was a ballot initiative.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's a different thing in the entirety, and I'm not going to get into that particular details. What I'm just putting forward is that Indiana is like literally the only red state with a red flag law. Indiana is one of the few states that has a few like weird like left-wing leanings that, kind of puts it in the regard where they're like, oh, I was expecting maybe a little bit something lighter. Nope, we're first out of the gate. We beat everybody. Like, what? Okay.
Yeah, I would have thought it was like South Carolina or something, right?
Right. But that being said, that leaves me the question: when people follow suit, will it be something harsher? Because basically, outside of the core 5 things that people bitch about, like incest and rape and all that, outside of the core 5, it's pretty much kind of illegal to get abortion after I think like 6 weeks here now.
Isn't incest legal in Mississippi?
I have no fucking
idea.
I'm kidding. But I'm just saying, they're not making exceptions for incest. Let's put it that way.
One thing I need to point out, though, is that it wasn't a personhood amendment that was being passed. What it was in Kansas, it was saying that the legislature has the authority to either ban or approve abortion. So it was amending their state constitution to remove the protection of abortion from their state constitution based on the interpretation of privacy and the equal rights, the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I was wrong about that, I guess.
I'll be right back. I gotta take care of the dog. For some reason, he will not shut the fuck up, and I'm getting tired of it. So,
He's just
and,
lonely.
and,
Cypher, what do you think? We haven't heard from you on this.
Yeah, so I don't know. Um, I'm not sure if the poll quality has gone down. I don't think it's gone down enough to say it's terrible. And the reason I say that is because the state polls always trash, complete crapshoot. So that's why I was telling people, hey, don't pay attention to national polls in 2016. It's the state polls that matter, and those are going to change. Those are on razor thin margins. But the national in 2016 was pretty much identical. It was like 52, right? 52 40 48, and it was like 51 49 or 50. It was like 49. No, actually, it went to like a dead split favoring Clinton with the aggregate. And then it was within the margin of error. So that's accurate, right? And then with 2020, it was almost matched up perfectly as far as how many votes Biden got nationally.
Yes, that's well. You're saying nationally, right? But you're
Yes.
saying that the state level polls
State level polls are a crapshoot and have been for a long time, and they've gotten worse.
Right, and those are the ones that are getting worse. And I actually think that the turnout. I think that it's likely that polls are going to be better, more reliable this year than in 2020, because the Republican turnout, like the models that we had, were really were not like the way that polling works in politics. They apply a likely voter screen
Yep.
based on past turnout for elections that were similar. So like they'll model what they think the electorate's going to be in this election based on what the composition of the electorate was in the previous presidential election, not the last election, the last presidential election, because presidential elections are different than off years. So this off year election turnout model for polls is going to be similar to like, I don't know, they're going to like take something that's an approximation of like 2018 and then 2014, right? Like they're going to like mix things up based on those previous two off year elections, and because I think that the Republicans had they like Donald Trump turned out, he like maxed out unlikely white rural voters, right? Like the voters who do not turn out to vote because they're just poor and they don't think the system gives a shit about them, and they're just like living their lives in the boonies. Those people voted in 2020, and that was like way beyond what people could have imagined. And the Democrats did the same thing on their side, right? And we're likely to see really low turnout in this election.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like, you know, I could see low turnout period on both sides. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. I just no, I agree with that. I just don't know if what we're seeing with Republicans turnout, like you said earlier, if it's going to keep going. But I do
Right.
think these massive losses are going to actually help suppress that to a degree. Because why vote for those people if they're not going to
Yeah.
come to my aid? And then in the Senate, it's not going to matter if they do like, oh, I love this maggiest of the maggest person, if everybody else hates them. And that's what it seems like to be the case, especially, I mean, Dr. Oz
Yeah.
is going to get crushed because he's inept,
He's probably
not
gonna lose, yeah.
charismatic at all, and he's stepped in it already like 5 times. Like, how do you step in it 5 times? How do you pivot to MAGA and then pivot away from MAGA and expect MAGA to come help you? They're not going to. Like,
yeah, and Blake. So this is the other thing I want to say about abortion. So after what happened, so on Tuesday we had that special election in New York, and today, as of today, Blake Masters, the Republican Senate candidate in Arizona, like scrubbed his entire website of abortion language of like pro-life stuff, and has been like had made a major pivot on abortion. Which by the way, bonehead move, like so dumb, because none of the like liberals are going to be okay with this. They're going to know. He is a close personal friend of Peter Thiel, Blake Masters. Like,
Yeah, that's the conspiracy theory
agent
guy, right?
of death. Like, yeah. Peter Thiel is the guy who I don't give a shit about. That. Donald Trump is like an oaf. I don't like him, but like whatever. Peter Thiel is the guy that I actually am diametrically opposed to in politics. That's the guy who I consider to be true evil and the one that I want to see ejected from all civilized society, right? So if he's personal friends with Peter Thiel, I know this guy is a huge asshole.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, so he's not going to pick up any like moderate votes for this, but he is going to piss off the people he wants to go vote for. And the fact that he thought this was a good idea shows you that they're actually panicking over this. The Republic, like, it's one thing if the Democrats are like trying to talk themselves out of depression by saying we're going to get him with abortion, but if the Republicans are making panic, stupid moves based on this, that tells you that there's some polling out there that is scaring the bejesus out of the Republicans. So that's another data point that makes me think that this is legit. Possibly that this abortion, but see, here's the real fucking kicker. Then, if we do well in this election or better than expected, then the Democrats are just limping along, barely holding on to victories, only because they're losing on policy. Like, what are we? Do we have to like have a major right eroded that the American people depend upon?
Yes.
Every time, in every election, and that's how we're going to keep winning? That's insane.
Okay. We need to get... Ideally, what would happen for Democrats is that there was a blue wave at some point. Maybe it's now. Who knows? It's probably not now, but maybe it is. And get rid of gerrymandering. Just get rid of it. Gerrymandering is fucking the country everywhere. Just jettison it. Make it to where it's unconstitutional to gerrymander for partisan gain, and make it to where you can only make districts for population density reasons and whatever the Constitution said.
What you're talking about is a constitutional crisis. You want to know why? Because the minute that Congress, it doesn't matter if Congress were to ever pass that, the Supreme Court would tell them no. The states set their own laws on this.
I said a constitutional amendment because I know it's going to require.
Constitutional. Yeah. Right. Okay. So.
But I'm okay with a constitutional crisis because it's needed.
It is needed. A constitutional crisis is needed. I totally agree with you about that. We have to see more conflict before the end of this, and I actually don't think this is going to go the way that we want, you and I, Safer.
No?
I think that we're going to see traditionalism triumphant, elected by a permanent minority that's just going to keep on electing conservatives, and they're going to use the power of government. I think the Republicans are going to become the party of government and use the state that the New Deal Democrats created, use the power of that state to wage culture war on the American people, and drive any social deviant that deviates from the traditionalist mindset underground.
Well,
I think that years from now, like a generation from now, there will be another civil war, funded by, which is what the first Civil War was. The first Civil War was new money who had liberal social views compared to the dominant political entity came in and just funded a new military that destroyed the remnants of the old one.
No, please no. Also, what you're describing,
I don't want this to happen. I just think that this is
what you're describing is going. If what you're describing is going to happen, it's going to happen in the next 10 years, not in a generation. We're at a point. We're at a tipping point.
Why would it happen in the next 10 years?
Because we're already at a tipping point with the cultural stuff, and if people start getting pushed back underground, they're not going to take it. It's not going to be that they're going to take it. They're going to start fighting back already because these people are already starting to arm up because they're worried about it since Trump won. The fastest growth in new arms sales have been in minority populations, Black people, gay people, Hispanics, are the ones that are driving a lot of the growth in arms sales. And if they try to come after them, that culture is not gonna roll over. It's not. There will be battles.
I'm not saying there won't be battles. I'm saying that the U.S. government, as controlled by traditionalists, will be triumphant.
No,
and there will be a lot of people who die.
That will trigger the Civil War way quicker than what you're expecting. You and I will have to be armed in the streets in 10 years.
I'm not. Well, we'll see how it plays. I just think that the Republicans are going to end up winning a landslide electoral victories. I think that the new FDR is coming in is going to be a conservative Republican.
So what you're thinking is what Ty thinks. Essentially, they're going to take on working class sensibilities. Jettison.
I'm saying that the New Deal is going to be broken permanently and destroyed, and the people who made up the New Deal coalition are going to decide that culture war is their friend.
Oh. Yeah, no. No, you're no. Okay, so you might not be wrong, because culturally speaking, we're pretty right leaning, but I don't think it's going. So when I didn't understand what you meant by New Deal, I thought you were saying it's going to be reconstituted.
No, I'm saying that the powers of the state that were created by the New Deal are going to be used by the traditionalists.
I misunderstood what you meant by that. Okay, I can see that happening, but if it's going to happen, it's going to happen sooner, and I think it's going to push to a civil war sooner than what you're saying.
But what happens if they win with 70% of the vote in every state?
That's not going to happen. They're not going to win with 70% of the vote. Again, unless they can.
You're assuming that we're not going into major depression in the next 10 years.
I am no. Even if we go into a major depression in the next 10 years, that will all the more reason for not to happen.
If we go into major depression in the next 10 years and the Democrats have any blame for it, it's going to be unmaking of the Democratic Party coalition time.
Okay. So you think a populist right-wing person is going to just happen to be at the right place at the right time, and they're not
possible.
Sure.
It's possible. I don't see the Republicans. What's going to happen.
I don't see the Republicans even in 10 years being like, yeah, let's bring out the guillotines, fuck the rich. Like, I don't see that. They still are.
I agree. That's what I'm saying. I think that they're going to redirect all of their rage on the people who are weakest.
So you think it's going to be like a Hitler situation, and they're going to blame the other, and that's going to work. I don't think that'll work.
I'm saying that we're going to see something we've never seen in American politics before, which is pessimism winning and being a viable, durable political coalition. I'm saying that doomers are going to have their day in the sun.
That coalition's already starting to well, there's a left and a right wing version of it, so it's coalition.
Yes, and I'm saying that all the doomers are going to. I'm saying the people who are currently left wing doomers are going to get into the right wing party, and the doomers are going to be the political coalition, the dominant political coalition. And the only reason why I'm saying that this is going to happen, even though it's never happened before in American politics, is because we're entering a situation we've never been in before globally and in the United States, which is one in which permanent negative GDP growth is the lay of the land. And that's going to happen for 70 years.
No. Oh, well, demographics. As soon as I started
make
saying
it a certainty.
As soon as I started saying no, I'm like, well, demographics might point to that. I understand demographics too. I'm not as good at as Ty is, but you don't think we're going to have
We've never
robots?
been in that situation before.
You don't think
the United States has never been in that situation before.
You don't think we're going to have robots doing all our manual labor?
I do. I think coming out on the other side of this. I'm someone who believes that economic growth and progressive values, as we approximately the way we understand them today, like as the Democratic Party, like the way that the Republicans would call us woke ideology is associated indelibly with economic growth, and we will see lots of economic growth in the future, just not for a few decades.
Nah,
so we're going to see like a huge resurgence in. I think that like in 80, 100 years, pronouns. Everybody's going to be having their pronouns in their profile, and there's going to be tons of people across the like gender spectrum. It's going to be the norm. Everyone's going to expect it, and those people are going to be the most like among the most creative and productive and prosperous people in our country. And people are going to look at trans people in our country and be like, "Holy shit, I want to be like them." Like that's the level that I'm talking about.
You're making Republicans' heads explode right now.
Right,
but your genders.
Yeah, but
we're gonna add more.
Remember that 200 years ago, women had to wear long skirts down to their ankles.
Sure.
And things are only speeding up. The trend is accelerating.
But how does this parlay into Republican traditionalism winning for the next 70 years?
Because the United States isn't the place where that's going to see the fastest growth. So,
India.
I'm saying, right. So I'm saying that there are other places that are going to like take hold of the lance of freedom and go ahead of the United States, and we're going to be lagging.
No, come on, don't be pessimistic. See, you're helping the Dreamers win. You're helping the Dreamers win.
No. We're the United States is going to be a leader again in this because it's like our nature, and we're going to do it. It's because we're a place with so much space that people just come. Freedom lovers come here, right? So but it's not. It's just. We're just in a like. I've talked about this with Ty before. He's like laughing because he like thinks I'm silly. But I think that the like if you were talking about graph of human progress and growth, I think like most people who are on the left would say like progress is happening and we need to it's an exponential curve. And I think it's more like and I think conservatives think it's more like it's just like an endless loop of like virtue leads to growth, which then leads to decadence, then downfall, and we never make any progress. And what I'm saying is that it's both. Is that it's like an up-down curve where we have peaks and troughs, and we just reached a peak, and we're about to go into a trough. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be another even higher peak right around the corner if you look at like a long view of history. So
yeah, but I don't want to see 80 million people die in the process.
Sorry, man.
No, we don't need that. No.
I know it's terrifying to contemplate.
No. We already had the Great Purge with the COVID, so we're good for another century. So we don't need another one.
Did COVID kill them? I would agree with you if COVID killed that many people. But I don't think it did.
COVID killed, by official estimates, COVID killed 15 million people worldwide. I think it killed way more people, and I say that because I've been traveling through states, and some states just do not have people working. Yet there's people. So there's a disconnect in the official numbers of how many people died from COVID. I think it's higher, and I think that we're not going to see that because we did the census at the beginning of COVID instead of at the end of COVID, and we're not going to end up seeing the actual numbers unless they do another population survey.
Do you think that all the old people died in America and nobody knows it yet?
I don't think all the old people died in America. I think it's just more than 1 million.
And like a million older voters in America being off the board would make a huge impact on elections. It would mean that liberals are much more likely to win in every election.
I don't think it was that cut. I don't think it was just older people that died. I think there was more young people that have been taken out than are actually anticipated, and I think it's more along the lines of the 48 to 62 crowd died than what official estimates have said.
Okay, so I'm going to split hairs on this one. When it comes to like U.S. Statistics and demographics, don't get me wrong. There are some levels where like we can get into, there's only an official estimate versus the actual numbers. But the reality for me is that the Americans have done very, very well at basically doing population statistics on a year-to-year, day-by-day basis. I mean, when somebody dies, you get a certificate of death that goes and gets reported into the infrastructure that we have. I would be shocked if we're out of 1% on anything regarding deaths. If we're talking about some other countries, though, India, I wouldn't be surprised if 5 times the amount of people died than what was reported.
China is probably just like total crap. Like they just wrote a number down with no backing.
Here's the part that concerns me. They may have been a little bit more truthful than what we thought they were going to be regarding how many people died, in the regards that instead of like what we were thinking, where there may have been literally millions that died, there may have only been hundreds of thousands that died in China, but no one has immunity now, and so if they didn't have a death rate, they're going to see one surge. And considering how hard they're locking down, I might take the latter on that, actually.
It might. Omicron isn't as deadly. The Chinese vaccine isn't as good. So, yes, but no.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but compared to base COVID, Omicron is 4 times as infectious and twice as deadly?
I don't know that statistic. I just know that Delta was super deadly. And
Delta was deadlier, but was like by half. Yeah, like Delta was deadlier.
Omicron is much more contagious.
Yeah,
but less deadly,
less lethal.
Because right.
And so the primary reason, at least that's been actually officially stated now at this point, just happened earlier this week or late last week, is that China is shutting down and going for zero COVID because their medical system cannot handle it. Period.
Right, which is the same reason why we shut down. By the way, it's not. Yes. It wasn't to save people's lives. It was literally to make sure that. Well, it was in the long run, but it like everyone, like all the conservatives are like, they don't care about us. No, that's right. It was specifically to make sure the medical system was functioning, not for you specifically.
Yes. So, and China is just a lot worse in that regard, and they've actually officially admitted to that now. I got a Facebook message from a person that does English as a second language, but like internationally, remotely, and they have several Chinese students, and one of them told her exactly what I said 4 months ago, which is what I'm telling you guys now. And so I'm like, oh yeah.
I love how Nate Dallin is in the chat, but cannot somehow make it into the show.
Nate, what are you doing, man? What were we talking about?
He in the show chat?
Oh, China. How do you think that? Here's the real question: do you think that China's lockdowns are going to kill more people than the virus itself?
No.
Yes.
Oh, well, at this point, maybe. But
how many people have starved to death in their apartments, or gotten bacterial infections from their own feces? Just because they can't leave.
I don't.
Yeah.
Well, when they were first doing that, they were delivering food. I don't know what they're doing now.
Are they delivering food?
They welded people shut into the apartment complexes, but they were delivering people food throughout the entire thing. And there's all a bunch of
right.
Weibo.
Yeah, I'm sure that was logistically perfect. Like they just managed that perfectly.
No, it wasn't. But I'm saying that's what happened, though. Like so.
I'm sorry. From what I'm hearing, y'all see any of the leaks regarding like Chinese tanks in front of their banks?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's a different
anything about that. What's that about?
Okay, I've talked about this in the last show that I did, but I'll give you the TLDR. We actually may be in the last 12 months of the PRC. It may be that bad because, and here, let me explain this, and then you can break this down.
Yeah.
Everyone's been saying China's going to go to shit for 15 years, right? By every Western metric, this should have never gone as far as it has. Because what this is Japanese throughput economics refined, refurbished, and on crack. And so they've been able to push it further and further and further than anyone ever thought that they could. But it's throughput economics. And any time that you can't keep the throughput going to the degree that finance, or basically allows the financial system to run, the whole system seizes up and breaks down. If you've got your accounting and your budgeting right to where you've got all of your fluff that can absorb the impact of that, you're fine. Japan was able to pull that off to where they've just been slowly shrinking economically with the population growth, and so they were fine. But China didn't take that approach. China tried to correct twice in the last 10 years, and they figured out they couldn't do it. So they have just pushed this thing as far as they could do it, and they were trying to export the system with One Belt, One Road to keep the system alive so that they could basically become the manufacturing base for Africa, and Africa would do all the low-end stuff, they would do the mid-end stuff, and they would basically sell anything, higher end to the Americans. Problem, that has broken.
They don't have a navy. The problem is they don't have a friggin' navy!
Okay, we started building
even without Zion
barely.
Memes, yeah, even without Zion memes here, in the regard that, geopolitics comes back with a vengeance. The reality is that between the lockdowns of COVID, between the fact that they've pushed it so far where you literally have entire Chinese construction companies come in, build a whole set of high-rises off the side of town. You have another company come in and demo it, and then they do it all over again. They have probably pushed the system to its limit. And if it was just a company like Evergreen, which is like, oh, hey, a major realtor company went to hell. No, no big deal. It's their banks that are collapsing now. According to at least what we're getting is that this is a system that runs upon zero interest, bottomless fucking loans. And if they can't keep the zeros to make it look like anyone wants to go get their money, you have bank runs. And that's what we're hearing that's happening now. Is that between the fact that the Chinese people can't go to work to gain an income, they've been trying to do a bank run anywhere and everywhere that they can. And all of a sudden, the banks are turning up with tanks on their doorstep saying, we have no money, go the fuck home.
Okay.
If that is remotely, and I mean this, I'm not memeing when I say this, if that is remotely near factual, and that is not just one bank, that's a number of banks, and it looks like there's been at least a couple of them with different videos from this, the way this looks. If this is even 10% of the banking system, you're looking at China going from having 6% growth or more for the last 30 years into 10% decline for at least the next 3. If it's as bad as what I expect it to be, and it very well could be, China's over in 12 months. Their system can't handle that kind of reflexive impact. They will literally collapse within themselves. And this is
and you're right. If that happens, that'll end Apple.
Yeah,
it will end a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and can you imagine how pissed off the Republicans would be if this happens in Biden's
Dark Brandon. That would be fucking hilarious. But okay, so the information I have about what Ty is talking about is a little bit different. So essentially what is happening is that a few banks were basically doing what banks did in the United States with derivatives and mortgage-backed securities and investing people's money into the market in these market accounts. Not only were they doing, and then promising them a higher return. That isn't insured by the Chinese government. So this money is open to bank runs. That's not, this is not FDIC insured. And what they were investing in was the real estate market, because that was the only place that they could park the money. And because of the fall in the real estate market with builders not completing projects because people pay ahead of time for the projects to be completed. So they're talking like paying on a mortgage for like 5-10 years before a project is even done to go live in. And those companies are in distress, and so they're not actually building those things. People are refusing to pay their mortgages. Those mortgages are backed securities, which the banks invested in other people's money into, and that's having the cascading effect. China could fix that. It's not right now because Xi is using zero COVID and these issues to try to consolidate more power around him. That's my understanding. So if it gets to the point where Ty is like what Ty is saying, that China is going to collapse, I think Xi would come in and fix it simply by nationalizing these banks, renationalizing these banks, and taking the debt on and just forgiving it. That way, that the bank runs are no longer having a thing, and the people get their homes. It'll make him into a proletariat hero within China, and you'll see a Xi presidency for all of time. And it will be his family legacy, and you'll see kind of a mini monarchy come out of it. That's what I think.
Like a new dynasty, the Xi dynasty.
Yes. That's what I should have said. But yes, that's what I think has a high potential of happening. It could go Ty's way, but I think that the way I just said is equally as plausible. And it's the local governments that are sending the tanks.
Fair enough. I won't speak for or against because we are talking about one of the world's best police states, and our information could be, whatever. What I can say is that if I am going to parrot our good friend Peter Zine for a second, is that he has been talking about how the Chinese government has basically become non-functioning because, quote unquote, following what he has said, and I'm not an expert in this and I don't know where he gets this information, Xi has shot the messenger so many times that no one is willing to bring him news. And so all the erratic behavior that we've seen, particularly in the last 3 months, to where one city's shutting down, then one city's reopening, then we're threatening that we're going to be friends with the Americans, and then all of a sudden we're going to shoot down their plane. All of that is because there is no one really at the helm of the PRC anymore. I can't speak to the validity of that, but what I can say is that the trend is there that it really seems like China, to some degree, is losing a rudder, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, I mean,
And
that's
if
what
that
happened.
is the
Go ahead.
yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just
I
gonna
was just
say.
gonna say if that's the case, that
Finish
if Peter's right on that one, yeah, China's done. If even if it's only as mundane as what Cypher's saying, because if there's no head and control where they can fix this issue, then yeah, they're toast. But I don't want to throw my eggs in a basket because it's just humans. You all are fucking it up. It's what are you doing?
It's so what you're talking about is so profound that you can't just be like, well, this is going to happen, because it would be so earth shattering for our world that it's like it's difficult to believe until it actually happens.
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
I mean, even if you're very confident about it, you have to be like, how do you even picture what the world would be like without China right now? If it just suddenly imploded, like, that's nuts.
Yeah.
Nate was asking us to make predictions for the midterms. I simply replied, we did.
Why don't you come make your own predictions, Nate?
Join
I know, right?
One of us.
Yeah, he was just saying, he's like, hey, I love you guys, but he hasn't told us what's going on, so I blame you, Nate. I blame you completely. By the way, we're almost at an hour and a half. Does anyone have any final thoughts that we want to get into?
Yeah,
or
I want to do this Larry Summers thing since Nate's not here.
All right, fair enough. We'll do it.
All right, let me just play this real quick.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Can you maximize it on your end too, please? Oh, and turn that up. It's low.
I am currently waiting for the thing to fire off. Oh, there it goes. There we go.
Yeah, it's all the way up, but you might need to turn up your own volume.
Right. Go ahead and... Well, okay. I'm good on my end. We'll see what happens.
We're good.
Worry them that
apparently.
Okay, hold on. Anytime. Wait, I can't hear it.
I can't either.
Yeah, so you're gonna have to turn up your own speakers because you're sharing the. Are you sharing your screen or are you sharing the tab?
I'm sharing the tab.
Well, I can see all your tabs, so.
I guess I'm sharing. I'm just sharing.
Larry Summers, the Fed doesn't want.
Yeah.
Oh no, where it is. You put that in the DMs. Let me screen that real quick so everyone can be on the same page. That'll
all right, good idea.
So I just need that link.
Hold on.
Okay, I thought it was a message log. I guess it isn't. I'll go make a thing here.
Hold on, I got it, man.
Sure.
Technology, man. What can you do?
All right, there you go.
Thank you. I'll mute the stream. I should be able to unmute. Fantastic. Is it in the chat for this?
Yes.
It sure is. Copy that. Go away. Okay, boom. And then we'll not do that. We'll do this. So complicated, I tell you what.
Yeah, sorry, I threw a wrench here.
No, you're cool. It's fine. Gotcha. All right, so you should be able to hear it on here, and then I'll zoom it in on the show. So in 3, 2, 1.
Financial conditions are now materially looser than they were when the Fed last met. And when in the middle of a tightening cycle, financial conditions are substantially loosening, that has to make a central bank nervous. David,
that's basically the part that I wanted to play.
All right, that's fine.
So this is something I've been talking about for a long time. For those of you who've been watching these streams, and I just think it's interesting that I actually don't like Larry Summers that much, but I think he thinks of things in the same way I do because he's worked in government a lot. And the way that he's thinking about this is like a control thing, right? Like, a lot of people who watch the Fed who have like a more economic, like a market participant perspective as investors or money managers don't have this perspective. But like everything with policymakers starts with control. You're trying to inspire confidence that whatever policy you're implementing is like effective and competent and helps to structure things, right? Like it has to, you have to look really powerful and you cannot look impotent. But the problem that the Fed has, and this happens so rarely, it's really rare that the bond market gets out ahead of the Federal Reserve in any direction, whether it's up or down, like in terms of setting interest rates. The last time this happened was a long time ago, almost 30 years ago, in 1994. That was the last time that the bond market started raising rates on U.S. Treasury bonds without the Fed making a move. And all through last year, the bond market was raising rates. There was tightening going on before the Fed ever stepped in. The Fed never raised rates until March of this year. And so for like 6 months, there was tightening going on in the bond market before the Fed ever got their act together to actually act and raise rates. And so what that creates is an expectations game where now, and this is why the Fed likes to avoid these situations, now market participants get to place bets on where they think the Fed is going to go in the future because they got out ahead of where the Fed is. And so this is the reason why Larry Summers says that they should be worried is now the Fed is really into hiking, but the market participants other than the Fed in the Treasury market are already anticipating loosening market conditions, right? And so Larry Summers says that should be worrying to them. I mean, maybe it should be worrying to them. But this is just what happens. This is what happens when you get behind the 8 ball and you're not the one leading, but you're the one following. Because what actually happens is since the bond market interest rates that are set by the bond market are above the Fed's interest rates, we don't know exactly where the two are going to meet, but they're going to meet at some point, and that's going to be the moment of truth. And so Larry Summers thinks they should be concerned that the bond market is loosening while they're trying to tighten. What's actually happening is they're coming down to meet each other. The Fed is going up, and the bond market is coming down. And so Larry Summers is saying in this video that the Federal Reserve needs to keep talking tough in order to scare the bond market more. But I don't necessarily buy that it's the Fed's responsibility to look like they're in charge. I just think that they need to follow their mandate and communicate that clearly. But I think it's very telling, as someone who is a former Treasury Secretary and a man about town in Washington, D.C., who a lot of boomers listen to. Yeah, I know, right? That he is thinking that this is concerning to them. Because if boomer number one, Larry Summers, thinks that this is concerning and undermines the perceived power of the Fed, then boomer number two, all the Fed governors, including the head honcho himself, Fed chair, what's his name? Forget his name
Jerome
right now.
Powell.
Jerome Powell is probably thinking along the same lines, and
He is.
and that is crazy. I mean, that is a big problem because what that does is that kind of ego thinking where you start to merge your own ego with the power of the state and want to like protect the turf of your office and show what a big boy you are. That's the type of thing that leads to policy error because and if they just went with the flow, things would be a lot. This would end a lot better for them. But I just think it's very telling that and instructive for those. I think that Larry Summers is being very honest here about how he feels and how he thinks that the Fed should feel. And I think it's instructive for those of us who want to watch and understand how these government institutions work. And this isn't just the Fed; it's all government agencies, everybody, all office holders. You want to see how they think? Look at this, because what it's all about protecting the sanctity and the prestige of your office, and you want to seem as the perception of your power is even more important than the real power you have itself. So that's the only point I wanted to make. I don't know if this is going to start a discussion or end it, but thank you for letting me make the presentation, because I've been talking about this for months on this show, and I never had someone else like that I can point to be like, look, this is what they're talking about. But Larry Summers gave that to me today, and so I'm grateful to him.
Was it you, Sam, that shared the video that I said "fuck that guy"? Was that you or was that Nate?
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck that guy. And
fuck
everybody,
that guy.
everybody else did.
Yeah.
I gotta get a clip of. I did talk about that. I did do that on last week's show. I haven't had a chance to clip it to put it out there into the ether yet as its own separate thing. But with that said, what I'm talking about is that a former New York Fed governor said that the Fed has to keep tightening rates to bring in unemployment up to tame inflation. And I'm sure that that's kind of where Summers is at. I'm hoping Powell is not. I'm hoping he's a little bit more dovish. And there's a possibility that he's a little bit more dovish. And we'll know that during the next Fed board meeting where they talk about rates again. If he increases the market rate, the Fed set market rate, or whatever the heck it's called, I can't remember right now. But if he increases it to 1%, it's a full basis point, or if he even keeps it to increasing it by 0.75 basis points, that could cause some real issues. I'm hoping that he squares the circle, cuts the difference, and only increases it by 0.5. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that he's like, hey, we're not there yet, but we don't want to see things get too far ahead of us like we let it beforehand. So we're going to let off the brake a little bit and only increase by 0.5 basis points. That's what I'm hoping happens. Will it? I don't know. My gut is
I don't think it matters.
Yeah, it's not going to matter. It's not going to matter. It's not going to matter.
It's not relevant. But that's why I think that they are going to do 0.75, because it doesn't matter and they want to look tough. Like, the people that the Fed care about even more than market participants are people like stupid Larry Summers. Like, he cares about what his buddies think. And so he's going to be like, well, I need to be a tough guy. You know,
I don't know. And then he's been loosey goosey with some stuff, and he has cared more about unemployment than he's cared than prior Fed chairs. I have to give Powell that. He does seem to care about unemployment a lot more. He talks about it a lot more as being a part of the mandate and actually bringing attention to the fact that it is part of the mandate. So I'm hoping that he says, hey, we're not where we want to be yet. We don't want to let it get ahead of us to where we cause stagflation, because that's a very real possibility. The Fed can actually help create stagflation. So I'm hoping that they let off the brake a little bit. But who knows? Maybe he just slams the brake even harder, and Biden's just like, all right, forgive more student loans, whatever. I don't know.
All right, so we're in an hour and a half. We're just about to wrap up on it, and I think that makes for a pretty good episode, unless you guys want to get into the student loan things. But I'm kind of running out of time, so if we're going to do student loans, we have to blow through that really quickly. Otherwise, we have a topic for next week, which always is good, because I was looking over it. You know what? Let's just knock this one out real quick, because I looked over it a little quick, because I'm one of the few people that actually would help. I would be paying student loans right now if it wasn't for the fact of the holdover. That's probably an extra $100 in my pocket every month, which hurts. And I didn't finish my degree, so it's one of those degree things that it would help me because I'm not making any money off of my degree, all that stuff. But I know I am the minority in that particular regard. There's a lot of people who, at least if they went to school, they actually got something out of it, and is actually trying to apply that. And there's some people who went to school, got the degree, and still didn't get anywhere. Like, there's a bunch of metrics I could put out, but I went on to see how if I could get my stuff forgiven. We'll let you know is basically the TLDR of that. We'll let you know when the program's available. We'll let you know what's going on. And I'm not saying this to be partisan at all. It's I would have been the first person in line to take this shit up. But on the other side of that, it's a promise at this point. It's not a program that's being rolled out. That's already
you're on an email list. You're on a wait list.
Yeah, it's you're on a wait list for an email just to let you know that the program's being rolled out. So that's where I've got the big issue. It's they've got some numbers out. They're talking about how much they're going to do. But there's a level where maybe I'm being partisan. Maybe I'm not. I will believe this one when I see it.
I mean, I think it's kind of fair. But at the same time, the website already crashed as soon as they announced it. So, can't hold anything with government and technology, right? And then they're also using the same stupid student loan service providers. So that's another problem.
So you're telling me that the same debacle with healthcare.gov.
No, I'm not.
It's happening with this.
No. The website has nothing to do with it. It was kind of a small joke. Everybody went to the website to check on the status of stuff. That's not how this is being administered. It's being administered through your loan service providers. So you have to apply through your loan service provider. The loan service providers are going to get more details in the next coming days or so, I think is the statement from the White House. And by that, they just mean the official bureaucratic paperwork to get them to go through with it. It's been settled. It's a policy. Now it's get it through the bureaucracy, send the paperwork in so it gets to the service providers, and the service providers take it from there.
So just let me know what I have to do and what everyone else to do to actually get this cleared out.
Call your
I will
call your service provider in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Literally. And wait for the Supreme Court to strike it down.
Yes, and wait for the Supreme Court to strike down, which they can't do, in my opinion, because there's nobody that has standing to sue.
That's a very good point. That's the first thing I thought when I was looking at this. Who has standing to stop them? Maybe a loan provider.
A loan provider, which they're not going to because they get paid more. So by servicing this, and the only group of people I could see trying to sue and finagling some sort of standing is Congress, saying that it's taking oh god damn it, I just put it in ether. Okay, it's going to happen now. So some Republican somewhere is going to sue the president for going over the authority for the tax purse strings.
Yes,
but
that's probably going to happen.
But yeah, I don't see that. And if that happens, Republicans can just be TFO'd again. Do it.
Right. It just shows how terrible they are.
Exactly.
This is popular, guys.
I'm quite curious if it's as popular as it's claimed to be, but I will not know. Oh my god!
I don't know. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong.
It
seems like it's something that would be popular.
Dude, the problem I keep having, and I just gotta get it out here, is I want to look at these polls and I'm like, all right, cool. What's making people move? But the problem is we have hit 4 or 5 major issues this year that's going to bring people to the polls. Abortion's on the table. The economy is on the table, in full force. We've got student loans, which maybe is a bit of a bigger deal. Fucking CRT. What the hell have we not hit? I'm waiting. Guns are on the fucking table. What is not on the table that isn't one of the core lightning rod issues that we usually see? Has somebody threatened Social Security yet? Is that what we haven't seen yet? Is that the only thing? I'm memeing a little bit, but I'm dead serious too.
It's going to be beautiful.
It's going to be
best Social Security cut ever.
It's going to be interesting and scary and terrifying and Anyway, yeah, Osiris actually isn't a regular member of this particular show. We are hoping that Nate Dillon was going to be on, but we'll just call him Nate Dillon for not don't. But anyway, thank you for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it. We did win a little bit over time, but there's nothing wrong with that. I have been joined by CSP Cypher. You can find him on Crowdsource Politics on YouTube and Twitch. We definitely like having you here. And then you can check out our good friend Sam Drizzy on Progressive Victory here on Twitch. You can find him doing that, helping people get Medicare for all in the technological age. We appreciate all the work you guys do and keeping me a little bit more sane, because holy crap, ladies and gentlemen, we are some serious nerds talking about some serious nerd shit here on The Conversation. You can check this particular episode out every Thursday, or pretty much every Thursday, where we basically bring the smartest folks we know to talk about a lot of finance issues. We are hoping to branch out a little bit more into what kinetically hits with policy. I've been bringing one or two more people in. The problem is, the next thing that we usually jump into would be energy, and we've beat that horse dead with our good friend Carl. So we're looking for something that's a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more kinetic, but something that isn't beat up too much, maybe like education, maybe like healthcare. And I'm going to be looking for Sam Drizzy and a few other people to set that up here in the coming weeks. But until then, I've been Tyberius D. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. Take care, everybody.
All right, we're going to be right back on my end. I'm going to take a quick break really quick, but let's stick around. We're going to get into the news roundup. All right, everybody, we are back, and this is going to be the Crowdsource Politics News Roundup. And if you were watching earlier, thank you so much for joining us during the conversations. The conversation is a kind of like a podcast that Tyberius D hosts with Sam Driz and Nate Dallin, and they call it's you can see it was like a very robust conversation about a bunch of different things. So yeah, that's something we're going to do a little bit more on Thursdays. Hopefully, you'll see that. We might do part roundup and then split off and then finish the roundup off afterwards. We might do what we did tonight, which is go there first and then come back here. Or we could see the roundup starting earlier or a little bit later. So yeah, that's something that we're going to try hopefully do more often. So thank you for joining us for that. We got a pretty good amount of news to cover tonight, and it's still pretty early. It's getting a little late, so we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the roundup. All right, welcome. This is the Crowdsource Politics News Roundup. I am the host and moderator of the Crowdsource Politics News Roundup, Cypher, and today we're going to talk about some of the news that was in the last week with the kind of analysis only the crowd can provide. So at the top of the news, we'll begin tonight with updates on Russia's war in Ukraine, which has entered its 7th month. So the following is reporting from The Guardian. Russia is threatening to disconnect Europe's largest nuclear power plant from Ukraine's power grid. It's actually harder to share the screen. Let's do that. Oops. Oh, sorry. All right. Sorry about that. Make sure we're still good. Okay, we're still good. I'm working from one screen today because I'm working away from home, so things are a little discombobulated. But we're going to get into it now. All right. So, as you can see here on the screen, we have the plan to disconnect the power plant, and this is the power plant that is in question. So, yes. So disconnecting the plant presents a very real risk of catastrophe, of failure. Disconnecting the power plant represents a very real risk of catastrophic failure of its cooling systems. World leaders have called for the ZNPP site to be demilitarized after footage emerged of Russian army vehicles inside the plant. Russia has been warned previously against cutting it off from the Ukrainian grid and connecting it to the Russian power plant network. Petro Kotin, the head of Ukraine's atomic energy company, said in an interview that Russian engineers had already drawn up a blueprint for a switch, calling it emergency planning in the event that fighting severs remaining power connections. He fears that Russian military is now targeting those connections to make the emergency scenario a reality. The plant's electricity connections are already in critical situation, with three of the four main lines connecting it to Ukraine's grid broken during the war, and two of the three backed up lines connecting it to a conventional power plant also down, he said. The Russian plan to disconnect it entirely would raise the risk of a catastrophic failure by leaving it dependent on a single source of electricity to cool its reactors. Quote, you cannot just switch from one system to another immediately. You have to shut everything down on one side, and then you can start to switch on another side, Kotin said. Today, the UN nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Gorzi said his team is very, very close to being able to go to the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. And Ukrainian President Zelensky says Russia has placed the world on the brink of a radiation disaster. Quote, it is a fact that the Russian military made the territory one of its largest nuclear power plants in Europe a combat zone. Let's go ahead and turn this off for now. Oops, there we go. Combat zone. Now all of Europe and all neighboring regions are under the threat of radiation pollution, he said in a Wednesday evening address. Zelensky also called for the UN's nuclear watchdog to take permanent control of the situation at the plant. And coming off of that, U.S. President Joe Biden confirmed a further 33 billion, 2.5 billion in military aid for Ukraine. 3 billion US dollars, 2.5 billion euros. The aid will include anti-aircraft missiles, artillery, counter-drone defense, and radar equipment. U.S. officials said the equipment, which will have to be ordered and will not be delivered for months or even years, represents a longer-term investment in Ukrainian security. It is the biggest tranche of U.S. military aid to date. NATO and the EU have also expressed their commitment to continuing to aid Ukraine, regardless of how long it takes to regardless of how long it takes to put down Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And furthermore, Britain is importing no energy from Russia for the first time on record. Figures from the Office of the National Statistics, or ONS, released 6 months after the start of the war, found that in June, the UK's imports from Russia were down by 97% and stood only at 33 million euros as sanctions took effect. Russia appears to be slowing the pace of its military campaign as well. It claims that the move is deliberate and driven by the need to reduce civilian casualties. Let's be clear, Russia hasn't given a shit about civilian casualties. What we're seeing here, this drawdown of military aggression, is more than likely caused by the fact that Ukraine is kicking ass and killing a ton of Russian soldiers, and they have to regroup. I just lost my Now, continuing on though, Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu said everything is being done to avoid casualties among civilians. Of course, that slowed down in the pace of the offensive, but we are doing this deliberately. Now, in direct contradiction to this claim that Russia is working to avoid civilian casualties, a Russian rocket strike this week on Ukrainian railway station killed at least 25 people and wounded dozens others. As for the slowing of their offensive, Ukraine's top military intelligence officer said it's because of morale and physical fatigue in its ranks and Moscow's exhausted resource base. And Russia appears to be planning tribunals in which to try Ukrainian prisoners of war. The international community strongly condemns this plan. According to UN Human Rights Office spokeswoman Ravian Samdani told reporters in Geneva, quote, under international law, individuals entitled to prisoner of war status have combatant immunity and cannot be prosecuted for having participated in hostilities or for lawful acts of war committed in the course of the armed conflict, even if such acts would otherwise constitute an offense under domestic law. To clarify this point, if the person in question didn't commit a war crime, then they are, under the Geneva Convention, allowed to commit those actions. So, killing a Russian soldier engaged in the offensive against Ukraine would be considered legal, even if under normal circumstances it wouldn't be. Continuing on, she warned there are few details available about the potential for such trials, but that images posted by news outlets and social media appears to show metal enclosures, possibly intended to confine the detainees, being built near a concrete hall in Mariupol. The U.S. has condemned any Russian effort to hold tribunals for Ukrainian prisoners of war in Russian-occupied southern city of Mariupol, labeling the proceeding as illegitimate. The U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price said in a statement on Wednesday, quote, the planned show trials are illegitimate and a mockery of justice, and we strongly condemn them. The statement also called on Moscow to comply with its obligations under international law. And that concludes our talk about Ukraine. It is. All right. Continuing on with the news roundup, we are going to get into U.S. politics. Now, Congress is still on summer recess, so we're going to take a look at what's happening within the Biden administration first. So, yesterday, President Biden ordered airstrikes on several bunkers in Iran in response to the attempted bombing of U.S. personnel by Iran-backed groups on August 15th. The attacks was carried out by Iran-backed groups and involved a number of rockets that struck near a military base in northeastern Syria that housed U.S. troops. The August 14th incident did not result in damages or injuries. The precision strike carried out yesterday targeted infrastructure facilities used by groups affiliated with the Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a spokesman for CENTCOM said in a statement. According to the statement, President Biden gave the direction for these strikes pursuant to Article 2 authority to protect and defend U.S. personnel by disrupting, or deterring attacks by Iran-based groups. Iran condemned the U.S. airstrikes and denied any affiliation of the groups targeted in the location. Quote, the U.S. attack on Syrian infrastructure and people is a violation of Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity, the statement said. Not entirely wrong here, more than likely. Now, the CENTCOM spokesman said an initial assessment suggested no one was killed in the strike, but independent activists and human rights groups claimed up to 10 people were killed. One activist group said at least 10 people were killed and 3 others were wounded. They said that the killed and wounded are, quote, foreigners and members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. Opposition War Monitor, the Syrian Observer for Human Rights, said at least 6 Syrians and foreign militants were killed as a result of the airstrike. Both organizations said the airstrike targeted a camp run by a group made up of Shia fighters from Afghanistan. The U.S. strike came at a critical time for relations with Iran, as there had been progress in the Biden administration's efforts to revive the Iran nuclear deal. A senior administrative official emphasized to CNN that there was no link between the strikes and the effort to revive the deal, saying the strikes were simply a response to recent Iranian attacks on the U.S. forces. Quote, whether or not there is a deal, the president's commitment to protect U.S. personnel, confront Iran's activities to jeopardize our people or our friends in the region is unwavering, the official said. Continuing on, they stated, the nuclear deal has nothing to do with our readiness and ability to defend our people and our interest. And this is important, right? A lot of people make hay about when the U.S. does something in retaliation for like an attack or whatever, and how that could jeopardize further negotiations and different things. Typically speaking, though, what tends to happen is that, this tit for tat is very much recognized as part of just par for the course, and that the larger debate about a particular issue isn't as nearly impacted as much as people would assume intuitively. This was true for some of the strikes that happened between Iran and the U.S. during the first nuclear deal that was brokered with Iran. Iran, during the talks, Iran-backed militias had targeted U.S. personnel. U.S. personnel had fought back, killed Iran personnel, etc. But the deal still came together because it was kind of mutual interest of both parties to do so. So there's no reason to necessarily assume that just because this attack happened and the retaliation attack happened and maybe another retaliation attack might happen, that the Iran nuclear deal is dead. It's not, so to speak, it's not over until the fat lady sings, to use an idiom that's pretty old. So that's what should be noted here. Now still, this Tuesday's airstrike appeared to send a clear signal that, deal or not, the U.S. will continue to respond to Iranian provocations. So that concludes that little segment. Now, let's get into the topic that everybody's been talking about, including us on our YouTube channel. Yes, we have a YouTube channel. Please go ahead and check it out. We're uploading shorts. Excuse me. Please check out our YouTube channel. We are uploading a ton of shorts there now, just little news clips and the like. Be sure to like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. But we're sharing a lot of news clips there now. We're creating our own little news clips, and we talk about different things in 60 seconds or less. And it seems to be doing pretty well for us, and they're bite-sized chunks of information that you come to know and enjoy. So go ahead and check those out. But what I'm getting at here is that it is official. President Biden has fulfilled a campaign promise by forgiving, at least partially forgiving, student loan debt. And a lot of people are talking about this, and we're going to get into nitty-gritty here. So let's go ahead and get into it. So predictably, though, factions on both the right and left side of politics have lost their mind about this. Misinformation hit social media in record time, along with some outright lies. So we're going to behind the headlines, because there's where the details live and the clickbait dies. So first off, let's look at the state of the debt. Americans collectively own $1.7 trillion in student loan debt, an amount larger than the gross domestic product of nearly every country on earth. Why is this debt so high? Well, let's start to help illustrate this. Average tuition has nearly tripled since the 1960s. And we're going to pull this up on screen now. As you can see, it has exploded, just absolutely exploded since the 1960s. Now, according to the data from the Department of Education, it takes borrowers an average of 17 years to pay off their student loans. Furthermore, increases in tuitions have led to bigger debt. So we're going to come over to this chart now. The rising cost of tuition has made it harder for students and families to pay for college. Over the past several decades, the cost of attending college in the United States has steadily risen. This is largely due to reduction of state funding, an increase in university amenities, and unprecedented demand from prospective students. I have gotten into debates with a lot of people about this, okay? So let's be clear here, okay? Let's be absolutely clear here. Absolutely clear. It is a combination of everything everybody's talking about. It's a combination of the number of students entering colleges tripling and supply not keeping up with the demand. It's a combination of state and federal governments completely wiping out up to, in some instances, 40% of what they used to as a percentage of their overall cost, wiping out 40%, up to 40% of the amount of money that had been invested in it from governments. And it is increase in what students demand out of college. When Reagan came in to office and started talking about what to do with student loans and student payments, he wanted colleges to compete for businesses, and he wanted it to be seen as a private good. When, this is important, when students started paying for out of pocket for their education a lot more, they started to demand things that they like. And that includes amenities that have nothing to do with an education, but more with the college experience. And those experiences include things like recreational gyms, entertainment, giant football league games and stuff like that. Like all the things that don't really matter for an education, but matter to the college experience, and including healthcare services, um, pools, that sort of stuff. Like that stuff exploded over the last 20 years, and it exploded because since the people were demanding that, and schools had to actually compete for students to make up the funding gaps, it changed the incentives of what college is, right? It changed where the incentives were for this. And that made colleges more like a business, but with a good and service that isn't as easily understood as a business as other goods and services might be. Because you go to a college for 4 years, we'll say 2 to 8 years, depending on what level of education you're getting, how long it takes you to complete your degree, etc. You go for 2 to 8 years, and by the time you graduate, the degree and all that work you've done to get your education to get a job or whatever reason you're going to school might have changed in that time frame, especially the pace of technological change. And some of that is why we're seeing some of these issues. And I don't think that can be stressed enough here. I don't think it can be stressed enough. But let's continue on, though. Let's continue on. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, average undergraduate tuition rose a full 20% in just 10 years from 2011 to 2021 alone. Tuition at private, nonprofit institutions increased more than tuition at public schools during the same time period. Loan balances rose right alongside tuition as well. Since 1990, the average loan balance at graduation has nearly quadrupled from just under 7,000 to 30,000 in 2020. According to the Education Data Initiative, which looked at averages across all state colleges. Moving back on to additional graphs for all this, we have types of undergraduate federal loan aid. So here's another fact. Average federal loan packages have grown faster than the average grant size. The amount of federal grant money available to students hasn't kept pace with continually increasing tuition or with the growth of the federal loans. And federal grants only cover up to a few $1,000s per year per student. One of the most common types of grants, the federal Pell Grant, awarded undergraduates a maximum of $6,895 for the year 2022 to 2023 school year. Now, Investopedia looked at the demographic inequalities as this as well. So let's go over to that here in a second, but let's turn this off for now. All right. So student loan debt is a huge financial burden that is only going to continue to grow. The debt places substantial pressures on already economically vulnerable demographics, young people and others just getting started with their careers and their families, and specifically from those of lower income backgrounds. And this burden doesn't affect all Americans equally. Members of some racial or ethnic groups are more likely to have larger student loan debt balances on average. We'll take a look at those next. So we're going to have this up for a bit. All right, so scrolling down. Oh, scrolling up rather, because I scrolled down already. Sorry. Okay, scroll. All right, so zoom in. Oops, there we go. So this first chart here is the size of student loan debt by race. The average student loan debt by race or ethnicity as of 2019. You can see that we have it broken down by white, black, Hispanic, and other. So the other being the Asian, Pacific Islanders, et cetera, right? Anybody that doesn't represent a large enough demographic by themselves to not be lumped into the other category. So we can highlight this one at a time to kind of see it. So you see in the 1990s that the average student loan debt was just over $10,000, and it's tripled essentially, right? For black students, it's pretty much tripled as well. But it actually started lower prior, probably because the people that were going to school at that time were more along the lines of probably upper middle class, right? And we can see this, but you can see that it is a bit more, about $4,000 more on average than white people. Hispanic people also tripled, but it's actually a lower share than white or black people. And the other category is a hodgepodge, and it kind of splits the difference between white and black people. Ups and downs, different years, different demographics, more than likely, different things. So that's why we're seeing this. But overall, everybody is starting to get more debt, but it's impacting people that don't have the resources more than those that do. Scrolling down to the second chart, we can see the average student loan debt by race and gender. So we can highlight women here, and you can see that for women, black women have roughly 6,000 more in debt than white women. White women have roughly 3,000, 4,000 more in debt than Hispanic or Latina. And then we have the Asian demographic having lower debt than others. Meanwhile, on the men's side of the house, we have a similar trend line. Black men have more debt on average than white men. White men have more debt on average than Hispanic people, and Asian and Hispanic have more debt on average than Asian people. And you can see this cascading, and it's probably again due to the differences in income levels. But black people, due to historic racism and systemic inequality, are more likely to have higher debts than anybody else because they have the least amount of resources available to them. All right, continuing down to the next graph, we can see this by percentage of graduates with debt by race. And this is where we can see even more of a granular sector. And this is by race and by how many years of schooling and the type of school a person has. So if a person goes to a 2-year public institution, so a community college for 2 years and graduates and that's the only degree they have, if they the number of people with debt for that is 58% of all black people that attend those kind of universities graduate with some sort of debt. Meanwhile, white people are at 45%, Hispanic people are at 26%, and Asians are at 19%. And this same kind of demographic split happens pretty much across the entire thing, right? And so we can see this here. 82% of Black people that go to college have college debt when they graduate versus 68% of white people, 61% of Hispanic people, 42% of Asians, and 76% for American Indians or Alaskan Natives. And that just continues on. So this should make it fairly clear what we're talking about here and why it's important to bring it up. And I think there's a couple more charts. So yes, so we have private student loan usage and outcomes. So private loans are those loans that are in addition to this, the Stanford subsidized and unsubsidized loans that are provided through FAFSA, and those are loans that the government itself does not control. So these are loans from private institutions, private banks that are educational loans but aren't subsidized. And these non-subsidized loans, these private loans, have higher interest rates than the subsidized or unsubsidized federal-backed loans. And not only that, but it takes into account people's credit, and credit history for people is based on their own credit history, but also based on the resources that they have in order to build up credit in the first place. It's going to be easier for a person of means to build up credit because they don't have to rely on their credit card and making minimum payments to make ends meet at times than it is a person without means. That is poorer than a middle class person. And because of that, and because of the resources that are available based on, like I said, previous systemic racism, what have you, you're going to see these gaps persist, right? And so, 17% of private student loan utilization, 17 white people use 17%. But from those that don't, from those, only 6% don't make payments. So that means that 6% have failed to make a payment on their loans due to financial economic hardship. That is pretty, but Black people, Hispanic people are pretty much double that number at 15.3%, and Black people are 26.5%. So that's a doubling of that, almost a doubling of that. So Black people are 3 or 4 times more likely to not make a payment due to financial economic hardship than a white person is. And part of the reason for this is, of course, that Black people are more likely to have to help out their individual families due to lack of wealth in those families, and also not being able to rely on their parents or their grandparents or their other family members to help them make ends meet for general living expenses, because the wealth building up is just not there. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. To make a long story short, systemic issues, economic inequality, racism plays into that. And again, same thing happens with the default rates. Default rates, we can see it. Private for-profit are more likely to default because they're more expensive and their terms and conditions aren't as good. Also, a lot of them are diploma mills and completely and should never have been allowed to be given out in the first place. But we have the system we have, and so they were. And but you can see that again, it's Black people are more likely than white people to have experienced this issue. So that wraps that bit up. Let's go ahead and turn that off. Okay. Now, continuing on, if I can get this thing to load properly. 1 second. There we go. All right. So what changes has Biden made, though? According to CNET reports, about 1.6 million borrowers have had their entire student loan debt canceled during Biden's term, equaling an estimated $32 billion in total student loan forgiveness. And that was before yesterday's announcement. The total includes the following: cancellation of cancellation of loan debt for students who were defrauded by scammers like ITT Tech, $3.9 billion for 208,000 borrowers. Another $9.6 billion forgiven for roughly 175,000 borrowers who qualified for Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. This program, commonly referred to as PSLF, provided loan relief for those working in public service after they made a set number of payments on their qualifying loans. A temporary waiver set to expire at the end of October has suspended some of the program's requirements, expanding debt relief across borrowers who may not have qualified before. As many as 9 million public service workers may qualify for PLSF, a recent report had found. Now, it should be also important to note here is that this program has been broken for a long time and was further broken by Betsy DeVos, who saw it as not a good program because, well, Republicans just don't like public service all that much. So these loans that were supposed to be forgiven were not being forgiven during DeVos's tenure, and she got took to the cleaners about it. She got took to Congress about it, but nothing was happening. Biden is trying to fix those programs now, and that is some of the stuff that we're seeing here. Now, more than 425,000 borrowers have received an automatic $9 billion in student debt relief through total and permanent disability discharges as well. So people that were on permanent disability, where the government says, hey, we know you can't work because you're permanently disabled. Well, we're also going to forgive your student loans for you because if we say you can't work, then how can we expect you to make these debt payments? Continuing on, as part of the Fresh Start initiative, 7.5 million student borrowers who are in default will be able to return to repayment without a past due balance. Now, the agency announced the program in April and on Wednesday released more information on how borrowers may benefit. Those who are currently in default will have the opportunity to improve their credit records, shield themselves from any collection activity that the government may be able to take action against them, including wage garnishments, and restore their eligibility for federal student aid. So these were people that had fallen behind on their student loans for whatever reason, and especially during the pandemic, that was very common. And it was very common due to economic tribulations and things like that. And so these people are just going to be basically made whole and being able to start fresh, as this program states. So continuing on, though, Biden's new three-part plan, the one that we're talking about today and why we're doing the segment, relieves $10,000 in loan debt for federal borrowers with an individual income of under $125,000 and a household income of under $250,000. It will also provide $20,000 in relief for borrowers that attended college on income-based Pell Grants. Turning over to the chart here in question, let's go back and so turning over to this chart here, if I can get it to tab over properly. This is how the breakdown for Pell Grant recipients have expanded. So as you can see, 66% of all Pell Grant recipients at the time that they received the loan were making $30,000 or less as a family unit. 28% were making between 30 and 60,000, and only 7% were making 60,000 or more. That means the vast majority of the people that were given Pell Grants came from lower income and lower middle class families. So these people were initially at least poor when they received these grants that determined if their eligibility for it, and those people are going to see increased forgiveness for the loans now. Reasoning behind that is that it's to kind of level the playing field to a degree and make it to where people that didn't have the means to rely on family or other people in order to help make debt payments and the like will also be able to get a little bit more forgiveness than those that did. So it's kind of a equalizing factor. Let's go ahead and turn that off. So let's continue on. So these actions will completely wipe out student debt for about 1/3 of borrowers, well, roughly 40 million people. And nearly 90% of debt cancellation will go to borrowers earning less than $75,000 a year. And we actually have to go over to this chart. Got another chart to show you. So as you can see, 87%, this is coming out of the Department of Education analysis, 87% make less than $75,000. 13% make 75 to 125,000. So this means that the vast majority of people that are going to receive income, receive the debt forgiveness, are not rich by any stretch of the imagination. So that talking point the Republicans have put out is completely wrong. Just completely wrong. Not even or buts about it. This is not upper middle class people having their debts forgiven. This is middle class and below having their debts forgiven. Now, but dollar amounts weren't the only things in yesterday's announcement. To follow through on Congress's original version of income-driven repayment, the Department of Education is proposing a new rule to do the following. For undergraduate loans, cut in half the amount the borrowers have to pay each month from 10 to 5% of discretionary income. Now, before we get more into this, this is a program people have to apply for. It's not an automatic thing. So if you feel in any way, shape, or form that you should be able to make a income-based repayment because you feel as though you don't make enough money, or you qualify for this under the program, which we'll get into in a minute, apply through your servicer. Apply. This will help you immensely. So let's continue on though. So the amount of income that is going to be considered non-discretionary income and therefore is protected from repayment, guaranteed that no borrower earning under 225% of the federal poverty level, or about the annual equivalent of a $15 an hour minimum wage for a single borrower, will have to make a monthly payment at all. So that means that if your payments are above zero, and you barely make $15 an hour on your wages, you and your family collectively will say around $20, $30 an hour, apply, because that's going to bring your payment to zero. And if you make above that and your student loans are, we'll say, $500 or $1,000 a month, or hell, we'll even say a couple $100 a month. So we'll go $200, say $200, $1,000 a month, apply. It's going to be capped at 5% of discretionary income. And that's going to eliminate, well, let's calculate it out. Let's calculate how much income this does. So $15 times, we'll say 40 hours a week times 52 weeks, 31,000 is protected. So if you make double that, if you make 62,000, your payments for a year will only be $3,120 or $260 a month. If you are paying more than that, apply. Full stop. Apply. In addition to the income cap, or not income cap, rather, in addition to the payment cap, it will forgive loan balances after 10 years if those balances are $12,000 or less. Now, the Department of Education estimates this reform will allow nearly all community college borrowers to be debt-free within 10 years, regardless of how much they actually have to pay. And since community colleges tend to give jobs that pay less, that means that apply. Just apply. As soon as it's available through your servicer, apply. But there's more. This is huge. This is huge. Okay. This is probably the biggest thing. This program will cover the borrower's unpaid monthly interest so that, unlike other existing income-driven repayment plans, no borrower's balance will grow as they make their monthly payments, even when that monthly payment is zero because of their low income. So what does that mean? That means that if you're under an income repayment program, under this one specifically, Okay, so make sure you apply to this one. That if during the 20 years you're paying this, that you suddenly come into money, right? Or that you suddenly start making a middle class wage. So you started at the bottom, now you're here kind of situation, right? That even though you were making payments that were below what would typically be considered a minimum payment, you're not going to have your loans expand in cost. So that when your income rises and you have to pay more, you're actually still paying down the balance, the original balance. This is huge. This is really big. This needs to become the de facto thing. Congress needs to cement this into law type of deal here. It has to. This is big. And not only that, though. Not only that. This protects future students and taxpayers by reducing the cost of college and holding schools accountable when they hike up prices. And finally, the administration plan extends the moratorium on payments to the end of the year, which means that it was set to expire in August. We heard news that Biden told servicers, hey, don't send out letters to anybody yet, which means they were going to extend it. And now we've known that they're extending it to December 31st. And this time, they said this is the final one. So that means that this is done, kaput, no more here, right? But there is never a good thing without a bunch of naysayers saying that this is bad. Whiners, grifters, all saying that this is bad. And of course, the right-wing media sphere has responded with hysteria about the impact on inflation and leveled accusations of bribery. So we're going to touch on that for a few minutes now. First up, we have Mitt Romney in a tweet. And that tweet said, let's go over to here. Do this. Sad to see that what's being done to bribe the voters. Biden's student loan forgiveness plan may win Democrats some votes, but it fuels inflation, foots taxpayers with other people's financial obligations, and is unfair to those who paid their way. It creates irresponsible expectations. So now let's talk about Mitt Romney's thing here a little bit, right? So I don't know what expectations it fuels. Maybe for more future loan forgiveness. Maybe I could see that. But as far as footing taxpayers with other people's financial obligations, it doesn't. It really doesn't. The money was already spent, first of all. Second of all, are you really thinking Congress is going to raise taxes to cover this gap? Do you really think that? Do you think that increases of debt increases your taxes? Your future taxes? Do you think that in this environment? Has there ever been an instance where Congress has raised taxes to make up for deficits on everybody and not on like certain things that they wanted to tamp down on? The last time we ran a budget surplus was in 99, but that was because of huge growth, not because Clinton raised taxes. And those taxes weren't raised on everybody. Makes you think, doesn't it? Continuing on, though, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia said it's completely unfair, despite records showing that her own company had $183,504 worth of Paycheck Protection Program (PPP) loans forgiven in 2020. Speaking of those PPP loans, here's some of the other Republicans who have said similar things. So we're going to read off those of you. Matt Gaetz, $476,000. Greg Pence, $79,000. Vern Buchanan, $2.8 million. Kevin Hern, Republican from Oklahoma, $1.07 million. Roger Williams, Republican of Texas, $1.4 million. Brett Guthrie, Republican, Kentucky, $4.3 million. Ralph Northam, Republican from South Carolina, $306,000. Mike Kelly, Republican from Pennsylvania, $974,000. Carol Miller, Republican from West Virginia, $3.1 million. So clearly they don't care about fairness. Clearly they don't care about, hey, you took out a loan, you should pay it back. No, they just don't like the loan coming to people that they don't like. And they don't like college graduates. That's what it boils down to. And now here's, of course, the ever so lovable, not really, but we got jokes here. Sean Hannity bitching about the same thing. Let's go ahead and listen to that. Nope. Can't do it anymore. Okay. We need to break this down here. All right. This is important to break down. All right. One, rich people aren't having their debts repaid. We've already covered that. The majority of people that are going to have some of their have their debt forgiven to a point where it's going to matter are people that are middle class and below. Two, it is virtually impossible to work your way through school in a reasonable amount of time now. Minimum wage has been stagnant for the last decade, and college tuition costs have skyrocketed to the point where you can no longer work a summer and during the school year at 40 hours a week and pay for your tuition, room, and board. It's impossible. That's working 40 hours a week, a full-time job at, we'll say median wage. Median starting wage is $11 an hour. Impossible. I know. I tried to do it. It doesn't work. It especially doesn't work now because you need to have time to study, especially if you're not a genius or a person that gets things easily where you have to actually review stuff. So you need time to study. And you need time for yourself. You have to have a good night's sleep in order to do well in college. This is why people that typically say they work their way through school don't mean that they work there and paid their whole debt anymore. It doesn't happen anymore. It typically does not happen. They take out lower loans, but they don't work their way through school, at least not in 4 years. Most of the time, from people that I've known that done this, took them 8 years to graduate, and they're working shitty jobs the entire time and struggling with their workload and their course load the entire time. All right, let's continue to listen to this bullshit, though. Relying on the Wall Street Journal to say anything on this anymore, especially the editorial board, is asinine. They have an agenda. It's just like the rest of the conservative media sphere, especially since Rupert Murdoch bought Wall Street Journal. It's gone down immensely hill since Rupert Murdoch bought it. I will say that their actual reporting is decent. It's still pretty decent, but it still has a rightward bent. Prior to Rupert Murdoch's acquisition of it, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but it was a few years ago. It was a while back. It was better, and it's gotten worse every year since. True. Yeah, that's because of you. Yeah. Okay, and this is why we wanted to share this. But first, let's talk about this. Middle class people are going to benefit. Good. Lower middle class are going to benefit even more. That's even better. People that are poor despite having a degree, absolutely. Since when did the Republicans care about middle class people benefiting from this? Oh wait, they always have, and that's why they're bitching. But let's listen to this segment here, this little bit here, to find out the real reason why he doesn't like it. Good. That also is not relevant to the rest of this conversation. So, yeah. Let's talk about that bit, though, a little bit. We incentivize people to go into debt all the time. We incentivize people to go into debt to buy a house, to help the economy grow. We incentivize people to invest in businesses, regardless of how the income comes from. So yeah, that's all this stuff. And I just realized I have not seen the chat at all while I've been saying anything. So yes, we have Nate Dallin. Hey Nate, glad you could join us. Student loan forgiveness was such an obvious good idea. Yes, it is. Appreciate you guys joining in on us. Wasn't realizing this. Not my usual setup. Apologize for that. But let's continue on. Now, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has agreed with Hannity. He called it a wildly unfair redistribution of wealth in favor of higher earning Americans. No, for what your majority stated. McConnell tweeted the move is a slap in the face to those in the workforce who made sacrifices to pay off their debt, as well as those who made different career choices to avoid student debt. Here's what the president has to say about that. Quote, no high income individual or high income household in the top 5% of income earners will benefit from this action. On Democratic side of the aisle, some vulnerable Democrat candidates are treading carefully as they watch to see how their constituents react. More about on the slap of the face. My entire life, Republicans and conservatives in general, have harped the fact that life isn't fair. When I complained about the fact that I had to go into debt in the first place to go to college, and that maybe shouldn't be the case, they said, tough cookies, life isn't fair. Suck it up. Go into debt, get your future. This is the reality that you live in, and you have to live in the reality that is given. And this is the reality that we're just giving everybody. People have had their loans, some of their loans forgiven. Some people have had all their loans forgiven, all the remaining loans forgiven. And that's just the reality that we live in. And if you don't want to see this happen again, or if you want to see some sort of recompense done about this, some action that you think you should get out of this as well, stop electing people that think that you should have to be in debt to go to school. Stop electing people that think that you should have to foot the bill for their rich friends. Stop electing people that think that student debt is moral and just, and it's something that only benefits them, and instead start electing people that think that college is a public good and gets treated as such. Because I agree, no person should have to go into debt for college. No person should have to sacrifice their entire life, potentially joining the military in order to avoid debt. The fact that people had to in the past is the problem, not the fact that people may not have to in the future or have to now. That's the truth. But now we need to get into polling, okay? And the polling is going to be a mixed bag on this. And there's a number of reasons for that, but let's talk about it. So, in a national poll conducted by the progressive think tank Data for Progress, just before Biden's announcement, found around 60% of 1,425 respondents agreed that the federal government should eliminate all or some student loan debt for every borrower, compared with 34% who said the government should not forgive the loans and 6% who said they didn't know. Along party lines, 81% of Democrats were in favor of canceling at least some student debt, compared to 45% of Republicans who said the same. The poll found more than half of past student loan borrowers and voters who never borrowed student loans believe some or all debt should be eliminated. Now, NPR Ipsos poll in June of 1,022 Americans found that 55% of Americans supported up to $10,000 of relief per borrower, but support dropped as financial relief increased. A YouGov poll and a Morning Consultant political poll found that 51% of respondents were in favor of $10,000 in forgiveness. However, a CNBC poll released this week found that 59% of Americans worried forgiving student loan debt could make inflation worse. But we'll get into that in just a moment. Now, the reason this polling is the way it is for some of the same reasons that Republicans have complained about this. And it's primarily because most Americans don't have student debt. It just is what it is. Roughly 30% of Americans do. Older Americans don't, and older Americans vote more and more likely to answer polling questions. Not only that, but people do believe that the sacrifices they made in the past were not only good for them to do, but right, moral, and just, and they will see a bit of resentment roll up that the fact that they did sacrifice for themselves while other people are getting it on the are getting it now. That's real world consequences of this happening. But sometimes you have to ignore the polls and do what is right and moral. And in this commentator's opinion, student loan debt shouldn't exist in the first place, and it's immoral that it does. And it is an entire albatross around the neck of of generations at this point that is just dragging the economy down and the American way of life with it. So it should be ended. Or I should say me, I am in favor of forgiving all student debt. And just so people don't get it twisted, I would not benefit from that. I do not have student loan debt. I joined the military in 2011 after being unsuccessful trying to find a job after the 2008 financial crisis and graduating college. And so the federal government, due to my military service, paid off my loans. I gave up 4 years of my life to not only have a job, but pay off my student loans. They paid 75% of it because that's the way taxes work on the payment program. And I covered the remaining 25% within my 7 years of service. So I don't benefit from this, and I don't care. And that's the way other people should look at it too, because the debt shouldn't have existed in the first place. And don't worry, Dean Goldberry, we'll get to your comment in a minute. So before we continue on, let's go ahead and get to this comment here. So we have a comment from Dean saying buying votes for 10K each. Well, how many people do you think is going to vote for Biden just because of this? One, every single Republican seems to be against this, so he's just pissed them off more. Two, progressives want to see all debt forgiven. So, no, I don't think it's going to actually buy people's votes. I think this is a campaign promise that he made, and he's keeping his campaign promise. Now, we at Crowdsource Politics did say that it probably would happen just before the midterms. I probably would have waited until September, maybe the beginning of October. But yeah. So do I care that this is seen as buying votes? I don't. It's the right thing to do. If somebody votes for Biden because of it, that's their prerogative. And to answer your question about who's paying for taxes, no, I'm not paying for it. That's not how taxes work. Taxes do not fund this. Taxes can fund spending to a degree, but there is nobody who's going to have a taxes increase because of this. So this whole idea that the taxpayers are going to have to pay for this and they're going to be more burdened by the debt is nonsense. Under that kind of thinking, every single illegal war that America's participated in the last decade is on the taxpayers, and the taxpayers are morally responsible for it. I just don't buy that argument. It's not the way it works. It's just not. We give people stuff all the time, and it's never complained about. Except it's only complained about because that's what people are against for politics. So this notion that our taxes are going to increase is just nonsense. Let's continue on though, and talk about what about taxpayers and the inflation? Because hey, good segue. Thanks for it, Dan Goldberry. So will this cast taxpayers? And what about inflation? Well, overall, the combination of higher savings and lower debt could push up inflation a little bit, and estimates are zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.3 percentage points, according to Michael Ploye, an economist at Wells Fargo and Company. Quote, in the grand schemes of things, that's not huge. Pologies said, adding that there are outstanding details that will still influence his estimates. But inflation right now is pretty alarming rates. At a time when the economy is already running too hot, it just threatens putting more fuel in the fire. To counter that narrative, though, the debt forgiveness is already has happened, but prior to that, we had 2 years of people not paying their uh, their loans. Most people weren't making payments to government during that time for these loans, and while that's been inflationary, it's already baked in. It's not likely going to increase inflation at all because the forgiveness isn't being totally forgiven for everybody, and most people are just going to have to make payments starting in January. So it's a tap on the gas a little bit and a little bit tap on the brake when they reinstitutes. So I think it's a wash. Now the loan forgiveness will likely counter any deflationary impact from recently. No, I don't agree with that either. So I'm not even going to do that. So this guy thinks it's going to also uh, this person. There's these people that think that it's going to counteract the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't think it's going to. Now, continuing on though, the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, a fiscally conservative group that lobbies for deficit reduction, also flagged that debt relief could undermine the IRA's deflationary impact. Now, the bigger drivers for consumer prices in the coming months will remain the interplay between strong labor market and rising interest rates, said the economist T. Rowe, Price Associates. At the margins, the loan forgiveness will help a subset of U.S. consumers. Now, while Biden's plan to forgive portions of student loans will reduce the burden for millions of households, it also pegs January as the end of the forbearance period, which we just talked about. That means that millions of debt holders with more than 10,000 of loans on or income levels above the income limit will have to resume payments for the first time since March of 2020, leaving the left over for discretionary spending. The loan forgiveness will have more of a long-term effect on household wealth rather than immediate effect on spending, said economist Aaron Derby, professor at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. School debt often restrains first-time homebuyers or eliminating debt. So eliminating the debt. Sorry. Let me back this up. Aaron Derby states, quote, student debt often restrains first-time homebuyers, so eliminating the debt could free up spending in the future. Continuing on, there are solid reasons to oppose the policy or to support the policy, but inflation to me is not a big part of that issue. This transference of debt from private to government essentially, and this is going to be spread out. The CBO has not yet completed their assessment so we'll be watching that to keep you posted. On the tax side of the house, it's not. Taxpayers aren't going to be burdened by it, as I've already stated. And the reason I state that is because the way taxes work is that we don't really ever see taxes go up on any time the government tends to forgive loans for some people or what have you. And this isn't money that is owed to banks. It is money that is already been either borrowed, but not for this particular program, or it is money that came from these programs to help fund it. So there's no debt that this has to be paid to anybody into. This is general government debt. And all it is an accounting trick to either count it for revenue or not. Personally, I don't think it should ever have been counted for revenue because it was artificially increasing the revenue the government was making due to the amount of people that were simply not paying it and the amount of additional interest accrued on loans from people not being able to make their payments as such. So it's not going to increase tax burden because it's going to essentially be a wash because the revenue that was going into the program that the government was estimating was coming into the program was not actually coming into the program. So it's this is the equivalent. This is what I've said on the short before. This is where I've said other places. If I loan you $20, right, as an individual, and I say in like 3 weeks, you're struggling. I know that you're struggling, right? For whatever, your car broke down or something, right? It doesn't matter why. And I'm like, hey man, that's $20 I loaned you. Don't worry about it. What does that do? Even if I'm really in big debt, right? Say I have the hugest amount of debt like anybody that you know. But I had an extra $20, didn't need it that week. So I'm just like, hey man, here you go. You can have this $20. And I say, don't worry about it, because I know how it is. Does my debt go up because of that? Do I get more burdened by my debt because of the $20 I loaned you? No, I don't. And it's the same thing here. That's the way you should look at it. All right. And that concludes our portion about student loan repayments. Now we have additional news coming out that just announced today. And this, okay, hold on. Before I get into this, let me read this other comment real quick. All right. If debt can magically disappear, where does the slippery slope stop? Mortgages, cars, business loans, consumer debt, all should be wiped out. Okay. This is the difference between private debt and public debt. Okay. Any money that the government borrowed to fund this program is still there. But that borrowed money doesn't increase the burden on taxpayers, because we don't fund the government through taxes. We don't care about the debt. What matters is if we can make those debt payments. If the government suddenly decides, hey, we want to pay down some of this debt, like we get like some austerity-driven Republican in office, and Joe Manchin ends up being king of the fucking United States or something, and he raises taxes and cuts spending because of debt, then maybe it increases the burden. But that's not what happens. Ever. Ever. It doesn't increase the burden. It's just there. And it gets rolled over every year. What matters is if you can still make those debt payments. A person can be in debt their entire life and never have it negatively impact them, as long as they keep making those payments. And we have to recognize what student loans are. Student loans are an investment in the public, not a private investment. People really need to stop thinking about this as a private good and recognize it as a public good. A highly educated population has immeasurable benefits for the country as a whole. We're talking innovation. We're talking less crime. We're talking less people born out of wedlock. We're talking less welfare. We're talking less social. We're talking more social cohesion. We're talking all these other things. We're talking not only that, we're talking about people that can figure out how to solve problems. All the other stuff that you mentioned, while they are good things for people, are not public goods. Now, we can say whether or not housing should be a public good, whether housing should be a right, right? We can talk about whether that's the case. But private ownership of housing isn't as the same kind of level of a public good, of a societal benefit, as much as education is. And that's where I'm going to stop talking about this, because we have other stuff to talk about, and it's already 10:30. So let's get into it. So there's more big news coming out of the Biden administration. They keep saying, oh, Biden, the Biden administration. And this one is big too. And this is something that should have happened a long time ago. So this announcement just dropped from the White House today, several hours before this. And it's one where Biden is intent on solving some inequities in our society. From that announcement, federally funded research, which changes our lives and transforms our world, is made possible by American tax dollars. And yet, these advancements are behind a paywall and out of reach of too many Americans. In too many cases, discrimination and structural inequality, such as funding disadvantages experienced by minorities serving colleges and institutions, prevent some communities from reaping the rewards of the scientific and technological advancements that have helped that they have helped to fund. Factors including race, age, disability status, geography, economic background, and gender have historically and systemically excluded some Americans from accessing the full benefits of scientific research. To tackle this injustice, and building upon the Biden Harris administration's efforts to advance policy that benefits all America, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP, released new policy guidance today to ensure more equitable access to federally funded research. All members of the American public should be able to take part in every part of the scientific enterprise, leading, participating in, accessing, and benefiting from taxpayer funded research. This is communities, that is, all communities should be able to take part in the American scientific possibilities. Now, this policy just dropped today, but what essentially this is saying is that government funded research, and we're going to research this new initiative as more policies and the like about this come out in the next week or so. So we're going to talk about this in more depth next week. What this is saying is that government funded research and a whole host of things is no longer going to be behind paywalls of academic journals and is going to be made available to the public, which means if you're an enterprising young person that just doesn't have money but is really smart and can figure things out, you'll have access to this government research and be able to use it for your own endeavors. And so that is going to be huge, and we'll talk about that more next week. Now, if you like what you're hearing, and I know you're due because you're still here even if you're arguing with me, hey, go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, ring the bell, what have you. It really does help us out. If there are things that you want to see us cover or you want to hear us opine on, there are numerous ways for you to do that, to contact us. First up, you can hit me up on Twitter at Crowdsource Poll. On Twitter, I like to post whatever I'm feeling like, some memes, and that's an easy way to get a hold of me. I'm usually on Twitter accessibly all the time. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can do that on Twitter. You can also join our Discord community. We're trying to build up our Discord community, and it's going to be a fun place to play, and we're going to have contests there and stuff. So go ahead and do that. And if you do Facebook, and I know some of y'all do because we tend to attract a little bit of an older crowd, you can join our Facebook groups at Facebook/groups/Tribune Comments. So yeah, that's the ways you can get a hold of us. So go ahead, and if you want anything covered or want to hear us opine about anything, check us out there. Now, continuing on with the roundup though, let's get into some primary talks because there's been some developments in the primaries over last week. So voters went to the primary polls this Tuesday in Florida, New York, and Oklahoma. There were no major surprises, with the possible exception of the level of enthusiasm from Democratic voters, though. Even Tucker Carlson had to admit the Democrats now have an increased chance of holding both houses on November 8th. Here's what he said on August 18th. It must have been painful for him to say. Quote, "In fact, all the indications we have right now suggest that despite Joe Biden's well-earned unpopularity, the Democratic Party still, again, as of tonight, has a strong chance of holding Congress in November. The prediction markets, which many believe are more accurate than the polls, overwhelmingly point to Democrats keeping at least one chamber. And maybe strangest of all, as of this week, Democrats are leading Republicans nationally in the so-called generic ballot by about 4 points. So if you ask people, which party do you like more, they say Democrats. In June, Democrats raised 64 million online from 4 million people. That same month, this June, Republicans raised only 26 million online from just over a million people. From the first quarter to the second quarter of this year, donations of the Republican Party dropped by more than 12%. By contrast, donations to the Democratic Party are up by more than 20%. That's not good at all, folks. Not simply because you need money to run a political campaign, but because money is, to some extent, a measure of commitment and intensity. And you see the same dynamic playing out in individual races across the country. Republicans have less than 3 months to figure this very simple riddle out, or it's going to be an actual disaster. All right, I hope my Tucker Carlson impression and cadence was pretty good. I tried, people. I really did. But let's talk about more of this. And now here's the primary results from Tuesday. Democratic congressional candidate Pat Ryan defeated Republican Mark Milano in a special election in New York's 19th district. Ryan, executive of Ulster County, had made abortion rights a major part of his campaign, and one of his yard signs read, "Choice is on the ballot." He defeated Milano's Milano, executive of neighboring Dutchess County, with 51.9% of votes to Moriano's 48.1%. The race may have seen rewind. The race may be seen as the first major test of abortion as a motivating issue for voters following the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Heading into Tuesday, 538 projected Moriano up by 8 points, 53 to 45%. Maxwell Frost made history after he won the Democratic primary in Florida's 10th congressional district on Tuesday in a reliably blue district that will likely see him elected to Congress. Frost, a 25-year-old progressive activist, is one of the first members of Generation Z to run for Congress and won his primary with 35% of the vote. His nearest rival, Ralph Bricey, had 24.7%. Now, Gen Z is considered to be people born between 97 and 2012. There's quibbles about that. I like to say 2000, but whatever. Now, according to Pew Research Center, though, and this is the first year members of that generation are old enough to run for Congress. Democrats in Florida have chosen Representative Charlie Crist to take on Republican Governor Ron DeSantis in November's gubernatorial election. Crist previously served as governor from 2007 to 2011 as a Republican before switching parties, a moderate Republican at that. DeSantis enjoys a high profile nationally and is considered a rising Republican star and potential future president candidate. He's actually running for president. Now, Crist made references to DeSantis' possible presidential ambitions following his victory on Tuesday night, saying, quote, "This guy wants to be president of the United States of America, and everybody knows it. He's right." However, he continued on, "We will defeat him on November 8th. Then that show is over," Crist said. Now, Florida Democrats also chose Representative Val Demings to run against Republican Senator Marco Rubio in November. For people that haven't been paying attention, Marco Rubio has basically picked Val Demings as his running mate. And by that, I mean he's been running against her the entire time, lifting her up among Republicans, saying how she's too lefty and all this, that, and other. And it's kind of similar to like the Pied Piper plan that the Democrats might be playing on some Republicans. But it could also be that he just saw the writing on the wall and she was going to win anyways. But needless to say, if you go to Marco Rubio's Facebook, it's all Val Demings all the time. Demings won 84% of the primary vote. So again, it could have been one of those situations. We're writing, let's just on the wall. Continuing though, in a closely watched primary contest in New York's newly redrawn 12th district, Democratic Representative Jerry Nadler defeated Representative Carleen Maloney. Because of redistricting, Nadler, chair of the House Judiciary Committee, was competing against Maloney's chair of the House Oversight Committee, with one of the prominent Democrats sure to lose. In Pennsylvania, Republican nominee for Governor Douglas Mastriano, who is endorsed by Donald Trump, declared he will turn the state into Florida of the North, Oh, God. Bro, nobody wants to be Florida. Even Florida doesn't want to be Florida. Why would you say that? Do you hate your state that much? Ugh. Pennsylvania, yeah, you got some messed up Republicans up there. I tell you what. Now, speaking of Pennsylvania, though, Democrat uh, Josh Shapiro is leading Mastriano 44 to 33%. He also received a larger share of support from Democrats, 76%, compared to Mastriano's support from Republicans, 66%. Shapiro also holds 40% of independent voters' support compared to Mastriano's at 24%. And Democrat John Fetterman currently holds an advantage over Republican Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz of the famed type, in the race for Pennsylvania's U.S. Senate seat as well, according to recently released Franklin and Marshall polls. In that poll, Fetterman leads Oz 43 to 30%. He also received a larger share of Democratic support, 76%, than Oz has received from Republican support of 62%. The poll also found that Fetterman leads among independent voters 34 to 17%. And after that crudité comments and stuff that we talked about last week, it shouldn't surprise anybody. Republicans, MAGA, you're not sending us your best. Or maybe you are, and that's the problem. Now, closing out our election topic is a report from Newsweek. For the first time in recent months, registered voters in the U.S. say that the top issue on their minds is a threat facing democracy, according to a poll from NBC released this Sunday. Previous NBC polls in March through May showed that the top issue for the minds of voters was the cost of living. The poll this time found that 21% of voters ranked threats to democracy as the most critical matter facing the country, while 16% chose cost of living, which ranked as second. And third was jobs and the economy with 14%. The poll also asked voters about their opinion on the investigations into former President Donald Trump's alleged misconduct. 57% of voters polled believe they should continue, while 40% of voters said they should stop. This means that partisan divide favors Democrats. Now, the poll's responses regarding the investigations into Trump conduct fell largely along party lines, with 92% of Democrat voters and 61% of independents saying they believe the investigations should continue, while only 21% of Republicans voters said the ongoing investigations, according to NBC. This news probably didn't make Tucker feel much better. Well, I'll get to that. Moving on to the batshit crazy side of the candidate aisle, failed Trump-loving congressional candidate Lauren Loomer isn't just refusing to concede despite her clear loss to incumbent Republican Representative Daniel Webster of Florida, she's declaring herself the true elected representative of Florida's 11th district. In a new Telegram post flagged by Right Wing Watch, the defeated Loomer declared that, quote, the congressional seat in Florida's 11th district is mine for the taking, before then declaring, quote, I actually am the congresswoman in Florida's 11th district, and everyone knows it. In fact, everyone does not know it, as Loomer lost to Webster in 5 to 6 percentage points and will not be sworn into office. And that wraps up our election coverage. North Countrymen, to your point, I'm actually in travel. I'm currently in Indiana, so I'm streaming on my laptop. So that's why you see all this stuff. All right, continuing on with the roundup, let's get into the economy. Actually, hold on a second. Let's get into the economy. The continued cautious optimism for the economy means more good news for Democrats. Reuters reported today that the U.S. economy contracted at a more moderate pace than initially thought in the second quarter. Consumer spending blunted some of the drag from a sharp slowdown in inventory accumulations, dispelling fears that a recession was underway. That was underscored by details of the report from the Commerce Department today, showing the economy growing steadily last quarter when measured from the income side. This is important. The underlying economic strength fits in with recent upbeat readings on the labor market, retail sales, and industrial production. Quote, We have had a tremendous recovery. This is a mid-cycle slowdown and not a recession, said Brian Bouthane, an economics professor at Boston College. Employment is still growing, which means basically production is still growing. But there are these issues with the supply chain as well. Now, gross domestic product shrank at 0.6% annualized rate last quarter, the government said in its second estimate of GDP, a revision up from negative 0.9%. That was an upward revision from the previous estimate. The economy contracted at 1.6% rate in the first quarter. So a total of 2%-ish, right? Now, economists polled by Reuters had expected GDP to revise up slightly, but to show output falling at 0.8% rate. The 2 straight quarterly decreases in GDP meet the colloquial definition of a technical recession. But in the case of the US economy, the contraction in GDP is misleading given the larger role played by inventories. Supply chain disruptions have left unfinished products on factory floors or at shipping docks. These products cannot be included in GDP until they go into inventories. An alternative measure of growth, gross domestic income, or GDI, increased at a rate of 1.4% in the second quarter. GDI, gross domestic income, measures the economy's performance from the income side of the house. So, generally speaking, but not always, and we're in this not always situation, GDP and GDI go hand in hand. They don't diverge. They're like pretty much overlapping, right? The directions overlap and they go up and they're going up together, go down together, right? Right now they're diverging. And part of the reason they're diverging is because the financial sector, the finance side of the house, is experiencing a mild recession in its own right due to the ending of quantitative easing and the increase in interest rates, which puts more pressure on the finance markets and takes away some of their profits. Because if they have to borrow money at a higher rate, they're going to experience less profits. And that's what I think we're seeing here. I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the opposite K curve, where people on the lower end of the spectrum are making a bit more money and experiencing a bit more job growth, where people on the higher end come to this threshold among the finance sector is experiencing a slight downgrade. Now, GDI is calculated using corporate profits, compensation, and proprietary income data. While GDI and GDP can diverge from one quarter to the other, there has been no convergence since the end of 2020, leaving a huge gap of 3.9 percentage points. Over the long run, GDP tends to converge toward GDI, though that is not a golden rule. Quote, hopefully at some point we'll have fewer supply chain disruptions and production will catch up, Bethune said. Continuing on, they said, production will be higher than income, but we are a long way from that. Both of which we need for other reasons, QE ending and yep. True, North Countryman, true. Now, reporting from the Boston Globe provides more context to both GDI and GDP. The continued growth in gross domestic income is an encouraging sign for the economy. GDI and GDP measure the same thing, economic output, from opposite sides of the ledger. One person's spending is another person's income. In practice, the two indicators don't always match because the government can't measure the economy perfectly, but they have rarely diverged this much for a long time. Both the Bureau of Economic Advisors, which produces the numbers, and the National Bureau of Economic Research, the semi-official arbiter of when the recessions begin in the United States, recommend looking at an average of the two indicators. By that measure, economic output grew in both the first and second quarter, and growth actually accelerated somewhat in the spring. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell will give an update on his assessment of the economy Friday in a speech at the bank's annual retreat in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. But the decision on how much to raise rates may depend on economic data released over the next few weeks, including the August jobs report coming September 2nd and a report on consumer prices due on September 13th. And we'll be sure to give you that information now. And I see that we have a person by the name of Kevin Fox saying, hey, let's change the definition of a recession. Definition never changed, bro. Never changed. The national, let's see, let me make sure I'm saying this now. National Bureau of Economic Research, which has been the official arbiter of whether or not we're in a recession, has never used 2 consecutive decrease in GDP to call an official recession. Its official designator is a long-term downturn in the economy, deep and long-term down in the economy. Their official measure takes the takes a composite score of GDP and GDI, which we just talked about, and comes up with a more robust metric of where the economy is. Under that measure, we are not in a recession. And if you look at jobs report, that should be obvious to everybody. In the last, we're at 8 months. So in the last 8 months, we have added roughly 1 million jobs to the economy. The first first half of the year's jobs report, jobs added had got revised upward with more complete data, and it is now sitting at just under 500,000. And this last jobs report added 500,000. So there you go. That's I mean, I don't want to talk shit about you, but okay, increase in prices don't make a recession. In fact, prices going up could actually mean that we're in an economic boom. I'm not saying that we are. I'm saying that your comment, my wallet has been in recession since January 2022, is just not true. That's not how it works. Oh, you corrected to Jan 2020. Oh, I see. So you're just a partisan hack. Got it. Well, I'm sorry you feel bad that Biden's president, but he's my president. So isn't that what you said during Trump? All right. Continuing on, though, we got to talk about the labor market. So let's talk about the labor market. So reporting from Business Insider shows that the first half of 2022 was a historic one for the U.S. labor market, which we were just talking about. Few other periods have seen the economy add so many jobs in such a short span. Economic employment boomed throughout the first 6 months of the year as an overwhelming demand for workers extended into 2022. Wages surged higher, only to be beaten by breakneck inflation. And the labor shortage persisted, intensifying concerns that millions of Americans might stick to the workforce sidelines. The recovery, while superlative, isn't finished just yet. Measures including labor force participation, the share of the Americans either working or actively seeking work, and the black unemployment rate, for example, remain shy of their pre-crisis levels. Headwinds are growing more intense. Yet there's still plenty to celebrate as the labor market recovery pushes into the second half of this year. The economy continues to add jobs at an extraordinary clip, and wages are still on the rise. Real wages, that means adjusted for inflation. The US economy isn't at maximum employment yet, but it is still making strides in that direction. The labor market ended the first half of the year with less than 500 payrolls shy of the pre-crisis record and still adding jobs at roughly twice the pace seen before the pandemic struck in 2020, which means that we're adding more jobs faster under Biden than were added under Trump. Now, July's blockbuster payroll report pushed the total count over the line and suggested there were still plenty of gains to be made as the economy makes up for more than 2 years of lost jobs creation. The unemployment rate, meanwhile, hovered at 3.6% through much of the first half of the year, just 0.1 percentage points above pre-pandemic levels. It wasn't until July, last month, that headline rate returned to the 5-decade low. The rate is somewhat skewed by the fact that it only counts participating workers, or those either working or looking for jobs. As such, the millions of Americans still on the labor market sidelines aren't counted. That's helped pull the unemployment rate to historic lows at a rapid pace. Americans aren't just finding work facts, they're winning huge raises month after month. Average hourly earnings were up 5.2% in the year through June, about 2 percentage points above pre-pandemic pace. It also only slightly slower than the pace seen earlier in 2022, signaling that wage growth will take a while to fully return to its previous norm. Workers aren't likely to feel much of the benefit, though. Soaring prices have steadily chipped away at Americans' buying power for roughly 2 years. Inflation adjusted hourly earnings, or real wages, are actually down from pre pandemic levels, fully erasing the surge seen through the first months of the pandemic. There's some hope that the trend reverses itself, though. Real hourly earnings rebounding slightly in July, aided by tumbling gas prices and still strong wage gains. Though it'll take several more months for wages to restore Americans' inflation adjusted incomes, inflation seems to be finally slowing down. Worker demand, meanwhile, has also started to wane, but is still much higher than before the pandemic. Job openings fell to 10.7 million in June of 11.3 million, according to government's Jobs Opening and Labor Turnover Survey, or JOLTS report. The decline was the largest since the start of the pandemic and pulled total openings to the lowest sum since September. This means that we had 11.3 million job openings in June, and that fell to 10.7, a decrease of a million. Now, the sizable 1 month drop signals that the supply demand imbalance in the labor market is starting to close. There are still only 0.6 available workers for every job opening, though, meaning there's a way to go before the two are in equilibrium, which should push wages higher. But as hiring slows and the economy settles into a new normal, the June JOLTS data suggests the more intense phase of the labor shortage is behind the US. But remember, a single data point a trend does not make. All right. And I'll get to your questions in a second. I'd just like to get to a break point from the copy. And I got to make sure I got the next thing loaded up. Yeah, okay. All right, so got some comments in here. Oh, I get more people to watch my videos elsewhere, bro. So it's all good. Let's see. 2/3 says I'm conservative too, Kevin. Okay, here we go. Here's a question I can actually answer. I want to know, Cypher, just as an antidote, have your finances been easier the last 2 years under Biden compared to the first of the 4 under Trump? Yes, unironically. I got a new job. I got a new job right when Biden was elected into office, and that job was a substantial pay increase. And my wife has also been promoted, so my finances are better. But anecdotes don't matter. I know people are hurting, so yeah, and there you go. So whatever. But I will say that you can't blame Biden for any of this. That's not how the economy works. The president doesn't control anything. The reason that I'm giving him credit for the reason I have given him credit for the drop in gas prices is because people are blaming him. So if they're going to blame him, they should give him credit. And we know partisans aren't going to do that, so may as well be the one that does it. But Biden doesn't control gas prices. Gas prices falling down are a function of the general economy and China's slowdown, and that has nothing to do with Biden. The war in Ukraine has nothing to do with Biden either. Russia invaded Ukraine. As soon as it did that, prices were going to go up. Didn't matter if we got involved or not. We morally should, and we are. So I support that. But that's not because of Biden. That's because of Putin. So no, this wasn't a job that was created by anybody. That's not how nobody creates jobs. The president doesn't create jobs. For the people that are watching at home, the president doesn't create jobs. That's not how it works. Also, it wasn't a job that was created by anybody other than market forces in general. Uh, and I actually was because of the GI Bill that I was able to get that job. So really, it's Eisenhower. If you want to say you want to give anybody credit. So yeah. All right. Now, if this is your first time ever joining the news program, we like to end the news program with a little bit of news of the weird. And this week's News of the Weird is both weird, gross, so fair warning. And we're going to talk about, and we're going to read this article together. And that article is, I'm a millionaire from selling my toenails, foot skin, used panties, and more. Because nothing makes more money than sex work. All right. So this former exotic dancer sells her body, and not in the way you think. Rebecca Blue has become a millionaire by selling literally pieces of herself, including toenails, dead skin from her feet, dandruff, and even a used uh, interurinary device. Videos detailing the skin merchant's used rags to riches story have amassed thousands of views on TikTok. If you see me throwing something in the trash, then there's a red flag because I'm usually keeping it in my bag to sell later. Blue, 28 from Wilmington, North Carolina, told Southwest News Services of her bizarre brand of flesh peddling. It's easy to say that a lot of people want a piece of her. This, all the puns, man. You know, New York Post can be fun for some things, and this is one of them. On average, the self-proclaimed professional goddess reported raked in between $5,000 and $10,000 a month by hawking an array of bizarre and gross mementos, from used tissues to panty liners. She likens the popularity of the trend of people bidding on items used by celebrities. In one of her more bizarre videos with 2.5 million viewers, the opportunist described how she started selling earwax Q-tips for $5 a pop. I mean, if you want to get close to the beauty, you gotta do something with the. I don't know. I had a pun there, but I can't do it. I can't. Ear cheese, toenails, bathroom trash, foot peels, dandruff, hairbrushes, old socks, vacuum dust, toothbrushes, Q-tips, floss. More in my book. Look at that money. Gross. All right, let's read on. So Blue Skin slinging saga began after the then exotic dancer, who boasts 1.1 million followers on TikTok, sold one of her stripping outfits for $20. However, while the customer was overjoyed by the purchase, the budding businesswoman initially thought nothing of the side. This was until Blue became a webcam model and realized there was a growing demand of items including used underwear and socks on the internet. Hoping to corner the salacious secondhand goods market, the entrepreneur started selling her particular mementos on the side. One of the first ventures entailed burping into and then selling bags, calling them clusters around. But I think that's good enough for this. And North Countryman does really good. So one man's trash is another woman's treasure. Am I right, guys? So true. True. So true. So true. But with that, everybody, I am sad to say that we out of time. We know you liked what you heard because you stayed with us at. Ugh. We know you liked what you heard because you stayed with us until the end. So go ahead and smash that like button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. Remember, we normally do this every Thursday from 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to roughly about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so be sure to check out the news roundup Thursdays, either on Twitch or YouTube. And as we always say at Crowdsource Politics, keep your head up through the political storm.